This is the first work of this channel and it was made up to part 10 with an artificial voice. After that, the other parts will be with my voice. If you've already seen some part, just look in the description and skip to the part where you left off.
One day Kangu went to hell, where only the strongest survive. He stayed in hell for 10,000 years, and became the Lord of Hell. Balzard, his servant, was sweating in the presence of the Supreme Lord, because he knows he is extremely evil. The protagonist demands silence and everyone falls silent. Everyone knelt before Kangu. Kangu, the Supreme Lord of Demons, exuding his evil aura, makes all the demons tremble with fear. Balzard, on his knees, says, "Welcome back, my lord." And the protagonist orders them to be quiet, as he wants absolute silence and further amplifies his dreadful aura. All the demons tremble with fear in the presence of the protagonist, and are paralyzed with terror. The protagonist jokingly says, "Authority of predation." And Balzard even chokes, as the power of the predation skill is so absurd that it absorbs any demon body it touches. It was with this skill that Kangu managed to annihilate all 7 demon archdukes. Everyone is scared stiff, thinking that the demon lord is angry. Balzard froze and couldn't even move a muscle. Balzard feels that he will finally be devoured. The protagonist says he lost 10,000 years in that place. In that hell, each day is just slaughter and more death, where only the strong survive. Then Kangu, removing his legendary helmet, shouts saying that place has nothing. Balzard thought his master was hungry and said, "We have a meal prepared for our lord." Suddenly, 2 demons appear carrying a huge tray. Inside it was Focalor, who was one of the leaders of the 7 demon archduke factions. "This octopus looks tasty, don't you think?" "Yuck." Immediately, the protagonist grabs the octopus and throws it at Balzard's forehead. The protagonist says he doesn't want to eat octopus, he wants to eat, and he makes a dramatic pause, leading Balzard to think he would be the main course. The protagonist continues and says, "I want to eat Quinta stew." Everyone starts to wonder what Quinta stew could be, and each demon imagines something different. Some think it must be the ultimate food, filled with meat, slime, and blood. Balzard, very excited, says, "Sir, what is the creature whose head or entrails we should bring for you to eat?" The protagonist lets out a big sigh and says that Quint is not that, leaving the demons even more confused, as they definitely don't know what this Quinta stew could be. The demons keep trying to guess what this dish could be. The protagonist, like many otakus, says he also wants to read comics and watch soap operas. And Balzard, on his knees, exclaims that his servants cannot satisfy the Supreme Lord of Hell, as they lack knowledge. After that, Balzard asks to be killed, as he is an incompetent and weak servant. The protagonist says he also wanted love in that place. Immediately, everyone stops upon hearing a delightful voice, and Lilith enters saying, "And don't you have me?" With her perfect curves, Lilith approaches the protagonist. Lilith is the succubus queen and all the demons are enchanted and in love with her beauty. The demon queen is the personification of demonic beauty. Lilith says that the protagonist already has her heart, but for Lilith, that's not enough. She wants to give herself completely to him in that delightful way. The protagonist freezes just at the thought. The succubus began to go into heat, and the protagonist, seeing that, orders her not to approach him. Lilith says that since she is the queen and he is the king, then they have to stick together and indulge. She jumps on the protagonist with her sticky tentacles. At that moment, one demon feels jealous, another envious, and yet another embarrassed by the spicy scene between the two. Now that you've seen Queen Lilith, what did you think? Isn't it truly the most beautiful thing? With her 10 eyes and sticky tentacles, she tells the protagonist, "Come drink, my eye is wide open for you." I'm even winking. The protagonist turns his face away to avoid seeing her winking. The protagonist clenches his fist and says, "Look at this." The protagonist was thinking about punching her in the head. Lilith, however, misunderstands and thinks the protagonist is interested in her winking. The protagonist tells Balzard and Lilith to come closer because he wants to talk about another matter. The protagonist asks if the preparations are finally ready. Balzard and Lilith said yes. The protagonist says goodbye and mentions that he will have to leave immediately, and gives a warning, "Don't even think about coming after me." This is an order, not a warning. And whoever comes after me, I'll gut them. The protagonist, seeing that they were sad, tells them not to be sad because he will return. Just kidding. Sometime later, we see a bizarre demon, the wizard Amon, performing the ritual to open the spatial fissure. That is in the middle of the demon god statues. Amon says the portal is stabilized. The preparations are complete. Lilith cries over the departure of her beloved lord. Balzard and Lilith are crying, while their master removes all his armor. With determined steps, the protagonist heads towards the spatial fissure. Soon after, Amon explains that, to pass through the portal without issues, the Lord must rid himself of the power he gained by killing the 7 demon archdukes. Thinking that he will finally go home, after spending 10,000 years in hell, Kandu begins to shed his demonic power. So much mana left the protagonist, that it quickly filled the heart core of 10,000 demons. Amon was astonished by the absurd amount of mana his master had. The statue of Baal and the other false gods began to shine splendidly. The dimensional fabric started to crack, and the protagonist began to think that even if he returned home, everyone and everything he knew had already disappeared millennia ago. But no place will be as horrible as here, in the 9th hell. Although Lilith was desolate and crying, the protagonist was already inside the portal, and with a mischievous look, he glanced back and saw Balzard and Lilith melting into tears. "Don't cry," said the protagonist, slowly moving closer to the fissure. And Lilith said that her heart was bursting with so much love. Bubbles of love, sticky and viscous. Lilith asks to go with the king, and he already looks disgusted, says screw it and jumps into the portal. She says she will follow the protagonist, and he, as he was already at a point where he could no longer return or be followed, says, "What the heck?" He starts to smile, and, looking back, gives a wave and says he hated meeting them, as he knows they will never meet again. He heads towards the core of the dimensions. Upon reaching the core, everything seemed normal. The protagonist starts to smile. However, the core began to act strangely with lightning bolts coming out of it. Then a message appeared saying that a fissure in the core was detected and the dimensional defense mechanism, Gaia, was activated. The core changes color, from blue to red. The core reached the limit of the power it could accumulate, and the defense mechanism of all dimensions was activated. The protagonist knows something is wrong. Shortly after, the Gaia system becomes overloaded with energy and shocks the protagonist, trying to kill him. But the protagonist is very tough, as he has a lot of power and defense. Thus, Gaia failed in the assassination attempt and soon concluded that it's impossible to kill the protagonist. But the Gaia system didn't give up, since it can't kill him. It will try to seal his power. Very wicked, this Gaia. The protagonist gets angry and heads towards Gaia's core, and says to the core, "I'm going to finish you off, screw you." Suddenly he feels something strange and says, "Whoa. Who's turning off the light? Who turned off the light? Pooh, screw you all," and he faints. Moments later, he wakes up with the sunlight in his eyes, looks around, and starts to feel the breeze, the sun, and the wind. The protagonist also sees, after millennia, a lot of greenery. The protagonist wakes up full of pain and checks his body, thinking he had broken something. Kandu notices that a status window is appearing for him, and wonders what it is. He checks his attributes in that window and sees that he still has skill in predation. However, most of the power has been diminished by sealing. The protagonist also noticed that he is at level 1. The protagonist notes that at level 10 he will gain a new skill. However, this new skill can only be known when he reaches level 10. The protagonist was very angry, because Gaia sealed his powers. He hears a noise and immediately looks back, to see some creatures coming towards him. These creatures charge at the protagonist with great fury, intending to kill him. Moments later, the creatures were already upon Kangu. The protagonist knows that these little creatures didn't exist on Earth, and quickly concludes that he's not on Earth. He prepares an evil Kamehameha, and fails miserably, because he forgot his powers were sealed. But the protagonist is quick and thinks fast. Kandu says, "Since I don't have magic, I'll go melee." The protagonist was left with a single power, but this power is a multi-rack, as it divides into several others. it was with this single power, authority, that he dominated the entire hell. Then he invoked the authority of the blade and immediately sliced 2 goblins, thus gaining 2 experience points and leveling up to level 2. However, there are still 2 goblins left to kill, and the protagonist slashes them both, leveling up to level 4. It took him just a second to kill the 4 goblins. The protagonist wonders what these monsters are and realizes something good, as they bleed and die just by being cut. Immediately after, the protagonist tests the predation skill, completely consuming the bodies of the monsters. The protagonist notices that the demonic energy has increased. The protagonist is puzzled, because he was no longer in hell. So, how is there demonic energy here? After the predation feasted, only the bones were left. The protagonist, thinking he was no longer on Earth, became very angry, because he had made all the preparations without any mistakes. But suddenly, he hears a scream and immediately thinks it's his imagination, believing he was hearing things. Moments later, Kangoo hears another cry for help. But this time, it was louder and clearer. Realizing the direction the sound was coming from, he used his hack, Speed Authority, and took off at an extremely high speed. The protagonist hadn't heard a human voice in 10,000 years, and the only female voice he had heard in 10,000 years was Lilith's. Arriving at the location, he saw a dozen goblins surrounding someone. The person was saying, "Please, someone help me." When he saw her, he couldn't believe it. There were 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, and big breasts. The protagonist exclaimed, "I can't believe there are no tentacles." The protagonist cried with joy, and immediately noticed that the goblins were furiously advancing towards the girl. The beautiful girl, already without hope, closes her eyes so she won't see anything anymore. After a while, with her eyes closed, she hears the sound of flesh being torn, screams, and then silence. Not understanding anything that was happening, she opens her eyes and sees the protagonist finishing off the last goblin. It took the protagonist half a second to kill all 10 goblins. Approaching the beautiful girl, he extends his hand to help her up. The beautiful, cute, and busty girl thanked her savior the moment the protagonist touched her hand and felt its softness. She thought she was in heaven after so many millennia in hell. The protagonist fell in love and looked like a fool. The protagonist felt as light as a feather, floating in the clouds. The girl gently thanks him again, saying, "Thank you so much." A while later, she asks if there's any other reason for him not to let go of her hand. The protagonist, who isn't foolish, after 10,000 years without seeing anyone, pulls the girl towards him. Out of nowhere, the protagonist asks if she wants to marry him. This is part 2 of Kangoo's story. Our video will start with a romance and then with him demonstrating his powers, and finally an excellent fight where he shows his superiority. We stopped at the part where he's looking like a fool asking her to marry him. She looks shocked, and he realizes he's too excited. So, he apologizes and lets go of her hand. Right after, he asks about her injury, and she says it's nothing and almost falls with her wobbly legs. The protagonist is quick and catches her in his arms, and she drops her phone. The protagonist is startled, because he recognizes that shape. He looks closely and thinks, a cell phone. And the damsel already says ouch, ouch. He says he's going to administer first aid. Tearing a piece of his cape, he bandages her injured leg and realizes he's speaking Portuguese and she's understanding. She thanks him for paying attention to her, and he can't take his eyes off her. Since he already has a profession as a pickpocket, her cell phone is already in his hand. But, not wanting to take anything from a beautiful lady, he returns the cell phone to her. With a quick glance, he already looks at the date on the phone. She says it's going to be difficult to walk, and he, without much information about this world, asks her, "What are you doing in a place like this?" The beautiful lady responds that she awakened as a player yesterday and was hunting alone in the E-rank portal. And he starts to think, awakened? As a player? And he asks her, "So, what level are you?" She replies that she's at level 6. and asks what level he is. And the protagonist responds that it's probably lower than hers. She says she has her reasons for being there alone, and he says he also has his reasons. And then she realizes she's in a forest, sitting on the ground, right next to the protagonist. She quickly stands up, suggesting they leave. He, like a gentleman, asks again if she's okay, and says, "Let me give you a hand." And he says, "So, where are we going?" The protagonist is happy because after 10,000 years, he talked to someone. Arriving at the entrance, he is amazed by the size of the portal. She looks at him, smiles, and says, "Let's go now." And he notices that the portal is a spatial rift and that there is no mechanism supporting that rift. And passing through this type of portal for the first time, he is astonished by what he is seeing. Soon he starts seeing people asking for members for random groups. Tank, mage. However, they just don't want rogues. The protagonist only sees people with a mouth, a nose, and no tentacles. The protagonist thinks it's full of humans. Trembling with happiness, the protagonist starts to cry because he really managed to return. And the little cat had an idea of how to thank him for being rescued. She leans in and asks the protagonist to go home with her. And since he's been without anything for 10,000 years, he gets scared and starts thinking silly things, and she is really very grateful for being saved by him. And the protagonist can't stop dreaming nonsense. Suddenly, two soldiers say, "You two, wait a moment. Come here." And they say they need to confirm their identities. The little cat says, "Just a moment, let me get my ID." And the protagonist thinks, there's no other way, I'll have to use that. And he uses another stolen power. Authority of the Blind from the demon Dantalion. This ability manipulates the target's perception and vision. And so the soldier confirmed their identities and then let them pass. Arriving at the apartment where she lives, she already informs the protagonist that they don't have an elevator and will have to take the stairs. And the protagonist is very happy doing the initial reconnaissance of the old building, and notices the smell of an old building, narrow stairs, cold handrail, and dusty window. And he was even happier because it was Seola's house. Seola is the name of the beautiful girl. At her house, the protagonist starts thinking a bunch of nonsense. And his unhappy expression is really funny when she says, "Mom." The girl doesn't live alone, she lives with her mother. The mother asks if her daughter did what she was told, going there with the group. The daughter lies and says yes. Then, the daughter shows the protagonist, saying he helped in a very difficult situation. Look at his smug face, thinking he was going to get something else. The mother thanks him for saving her daughter and says she doesn't know how to repay him, inviting the protagonist to come in. Still with a smug face, he thanks her. The mother goes to the kitchen and asks for her daughter's help, and only then does she notice that there were many messages from her mother. Then the protagonist remembers the cell phone and that he needs more information about this world. Then he blatantly lies, saying he lost his cell phone and asks if he can borrow hers. She lends it to him and says the food will be ready soon. Returning after 10,000 years, everything seemed very interesting to him. I bet he's going to check the final chapter of One Piece. But he's focused and goes after information instead of typing gossip. He disappeared in 2018 and has already returned in the year 2023. He stayed in hell for 10,000 years. He returned in time 5 years after his disappearance. He read a message about February 22, 2018, the day of the calamity. Several portals opened worldwide, and firearms were useless against them, and humanity united against the monsters. After that, the first player appeared in the United States, and countless players appeared all over the world. He, seeing the date, remembers that this was the day he was taken to hell. And he wonders if he was sucked in by a portal that day, but realizes that it's all speculation. Seola says, "The food is ready." The protagonist couldn't believe what he was seeing. The girl didn't know, but she made the dish he had been wanting to eat for 10,000 years. Kimchi stew. Shall we eat? He grabs the spoon, dips it into the soup, and kimchi. Upon eating the first spoonful, he can't say anything else. And they look astonished at the sounds he was making. And the protagonist starts eating non-stop, without saying anything else. Devouring the food. The protagonist had spent 10,000 years in hell. The only thing he ate during that time was demon meat, and he had to eat many demons to survive. Demon meat doesn't satisfy and tastes horribly like garbage. He ate and ate, and the only thing that kept him sane was the desire to return home. And he did everything he could to return to Earth. Crying with joy, he couldn't believe he had returned and was eating what he had longed for. His mother and the girl look at him astonished as he was crying, and says, "Seola, truly, your food was delicious." And she, embarrassed, says, "Thank you." And she apologizes for that being the only food she could offer him, and asks if it was good. He said yes and asks, "Can I have seconds?" And devours another bowl. And since he was eating non-stop, she decided to bring the pot closer to him. Now he looks like Luffy eating. But suddenly the apartment door is destroyed and mother and daughter look astonished, as someone very angry has just entered. And a strong guy appears at the door shouting for Seola, and the hothead comes in yelling at Seola, saying she can't enter the portal on her own. She gets really angry and tells him to get lost. He can't even believe she had the nerve to say that to him. Then she shouts, "I already told you to get lost, Tae-young." And he starts thinking, this crazy girl is messing with me. Does she think she's something just because she became a player? And he mocks her. He gets angry and punches the wall, saying his level is much higher than hers. She yells at him not to come any closer. "You all must be missing the protagonist." "Me too. What could he be doing?" Returning to our story, the blonde guy gives her mother a stare, which makes her tremble with fear, and he starts humiliating her family, saying her father died early, and her mother earns pennies. And Seola yells that her family is like this because of him. And Tae-young says, "Forget about it." He grabs her by the arm, drags her to the door, and tells him to let her go because she will never join the trashy guild. And laughing in her face, he says he's going to put her in a very good team. Then, she shows how to fight when you don't have much strength and bites him. He slaps her in the face. The girl's mother becomes desperate and runs to help her. And he calls her a bitch. He asks if she thinks she will survive by only doing good deeds. And he adds, "You should have come quietly, as my tribute." Do you think you're a player? Then let's face each other for real. And her mother stands between the two. I was left wondering if this guy is the son of that lady and Seola's brother. Seola's mother, holding his hand, pleads with him to stop. The bratty blonde says, "Let go of me, old lady." And then he slaps the old lady in the face. Seola becomes desperate and goes to help her mother. The blonde yells that annoying people like them are always like this. And Seola stares at the blonde. And he says, "What are you going to do by staring at me like that, you weakling? You're weak and I'm a second stage awakened. Do you think you stand a chance? Then come at me. You're not strong, and the only thing you have is a pretty face." And the blonde says, "I'm giving you an order. You're going to join my guild. But suddenly, the blonde starts to notice the surroundings and sees our hero eating as if there's no tomorrow. And the blonde says, "What the hell is this? All hell is breaking loose inside the house and Luffy is just eating?" Then the blonde lets go of her face and approaches our hero, saying, "Do you think this is some famous restaurant? And Kangu is just eating?" And the blonde exclaims, "Bastard can't even read the room." The blonde starts trying to get our hero's attention, but is completely ignored. Let's Luffy eat." The blonde scratches his head and kicks the table hard, shouting loudly, "You!" And Kandu is paralyzed watching everything fly. Imagine what would happen after 10,000 years without eating a decent meal. Someone comes and kicks your food. The hero is in despair seeing all his food on the floor. The blonde looking down asks, "What's up with this jerk?" The blonde asks the girl where she found this bum. The hero starts crying seeing his food on the floor, and soon the blonde approaches to kick him in the ribs. Kangu, Lord Supreme of the Nine Hells, looks at the blonde already exuding a demonic aura. The blonde is startled to see that. "How dare you!" exclaims Kangu. And the blonde sees the moment of our hero in demon form. Kangu says, "How dare you spill my kimchi soup?" The fear the blonde had felt passes, and he starts to get angry. And he prepares a serious punch full of mana. And with little flames coming out of his hand, he thinks he must have seen something wrong, that he must be imagining things. Suddenly someone hits his hand with magic. And he immediately looks around asking, "Who did this crap?" And we see it was Ciole, shouting for our hero to run away. But she has no idea that the protagonist is so brave. The protagonist gets up and charges at the blonde. And she stands there with a blank expression, not understanding what's happening. The blonde is surprised by Kangu's speed and quickly realizes he's going to be hit on the left side. And the blonde is surprised because Kangu fainted and then kneed him. The blonde recovers and tries to counterattack Kangu. And Kangu lands a punch right in his face and follows up with a kick, breaking two of the blonde's ribs. The blonde grabs Kangu's leg, saying it didn't even hurt, and tries to punch the protagonist again. But once again, he was counterattacked by the hero. The blonde's nose is full of blood, but he hasn't given up and tries once more to land a serious punch on Kangu's head. But he takes another rib-breaking punch and falls on all fours, full of pain, with several broken ribs. And he asks himself, who is this guy? But Kangu has just begun his massacre and already stomps hard on the arrogant blonde's head. However, the blonde still hasn't given up, nor has the protagonist, who drives the blade of authority into the blonde's arm and whispers close to his ear, "Stop the drama, you little punk. I'm not done yet. This is all because you ruined the kimchi soup." The blonde is surprised and asks why he's doing all that just for a kimchi soup. He lifts him by the hair and says, Did you say just a kimchi soup?" The blonde is already scared stiff, knowing things are going to go bad. And once again, Kangu slams his face into the ground with all his might and bangs his head on the ground 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 times. Seething with anger, Kangu says, "Hey Blondie, when I say 1, you will say kimchi soup is. And when I say 2, you will say a sacred food. And you're supposed to shout." 1 kicks A. However, the blonde guy forgot to shout and Kangu drove the blade all the way down into his arm. 2. A sacred food. No, you're doing everything wrong. You need to shout. Like you're praying to God. Like you're trying to win a girl's heart. And the protagonist shouts at the blonde guy, "Shout with all the strength you can and with great pride." "Kimchi soup is a sacred food," shouted the blonde guy. And the protagonist, like a good torturer, says it's terrible and, "Let's do it again." And the blonde guy, with a broken rib, arm hemorrhaging, broken tooth, and bleeding nose, gathers all his strength and shouts, "Kimchi soup is a sacred food." The protagonist is satisfied and removes the blade from the blonde guy's arm. Now the scene from the beginning is reversed. It's the protagonist who is standing and the blonde guy is on the ground, and the protagonist says, "Never underestimate a kimchi soup in your life again." The blonde guy, crying, mutters, "What's with this guy, psychopath?" If you liked it, leave your like, enjoy, and share. Write part 3 in the comments and I'll bring part 3. And if you can subscribe, please do, because it takes a lot of work to make these videos. See you in the next video. This is already the third part of our videos that tells the story of the protagonist who was sucked into hell and spent 10,000 years there, becoming the Lord of Hell. Continuing the story, I'm going to have to come up with a different name for this girl. Alice will be her name. Her house is all wrecked from the previous fight. Someone has already cleaned up the mess and put it in the corner, and Alice is there, as beautiful as ever, taking care of her mom. And we're also seeing someone finishing washing the dishes and grumbling with a cut lip, upset, and nose still bleeding, thinking, "Why did I have to meet someone like him? I got beaten up a lot and he even stole my clothes. That bastard with the kimchi stew, still very angry. Why did I get beaten up just because of a stew?" Looking back, he wonders why he's being treated like this. And the protagonist says, "What is it?" And the blonde guy immediately trembles with fear. The protagonist even mocks him, asking if he's upset just because he got beaten up over the kimchi stew. And crying, the blonde guy responds, "No, sir." The protagonist thinks, wearing expensive clothes, going to sleep on time, being able to eat every day, and living comfortably. He will never know what I went through in hell. And the protagonist continues talking to the blonde guy, "You're blessed and don't know it? Treat your life with care." The protagonist realizes that the blonde guy is just putting on an act and is planning something. The protagonist says to him, "If you're done washing the dishes, come here. I've been thinking. I have no reason to keep you alive," and the blonde guy almost faints, thinking he was going to die. The protagonist tells the blonde guy not to worry because he won't kill him. "But you would probably prefer to die," and the blonde guy turns pale. Authority of fear, demon Orobas. And the blonde guy starts to feel the power of the skill and screams for Orobas not to come closer. He starts to wet himself out of fear. On the ground and soaked, the blonde guy begins to feel the full pressure of the skill. The skill imprints an impregnable mark of fear on the target's soul and turns him into a puppet. And the protagonist finishes by telling him to never reveal what happened there and orders him to leave. Now the beating is complete. The blonde guy is destroyed in body and soul. Alice, seeing the blonde guy leaving, thanks the protagonist for saving her once again. And the protagonist starts thinking about something that's bothering him a lot, that he's poor and has no money. When suddenly he starts reading about magical power stones that drop from creatures and asks Alice if she has any magic stones, to which she replies yes. She searches in her bag and finds the only stone she got from hunting goblins. And here's the explanation that the darker the stone, the higher its rank. The protagonist, taking the stone, tries to feel demonic power inside it and senses that there is power within the stone. However, it is not demonic. And he remembers that he felt a bit of demonic energy when he used the predation skill. This led the protagonist to conclude that the demonic energy was inside the magic stones. However, when holding it in his hand, he felt that the power was not in the stone and that there was only magical power inside the stone. The protagonist knows there is a difference between magical power and demonic energy, and was thoughtful about where the demonic energy he felt at that time came from. and Alice said she needs to sell that stone to get money. The protagonist already knows how to make money and asks Alice where the nearest player management office is. Alice says it's in Seoul and that she was already planning to go there, and that her family's situation is not very good, so she needs to sell the stone quickly. She thanks the protagonist again for the help, and he says it was a pleasure to help someone like her. And the protagonist thinks, after looking at demons for 10,000 years, it's really nice to see a pretty face without tentacles. And she states that she will take all the basic lessons seriously, because she wants to awaken the second stage. The protagonist asserts that she will do well, and in his thoughts, he knows he can't take her with him, because she is too weak and will only get in the way, and his hunting efficiency will decrease significantly. It's a bit cold and calculating, but in reality, he has to avoid as many losses as possible, and the protagonist's priority is to regain his power, because he needs to become stronger if he wants to survive. It's going to be just like in Hell, a fight to be the strongest. And Alice asks, "Chang-ho, do you have your identification card?" He remembers that he doesn't, and asks to stop by the public security office before going to the player management office. At the public security office, the protagonist quickly picked up his ID and then, taking a train, headed to the player management office. The protagonist was surprised that at the public security office he only needed to request to reissue his identification card. He was surprised because no one noticed he was missing, and he wasn't on the list of missing persons either. With a sad look, he thinks about how no one noticed he disappeared. That's what happens. The otaku just stays inside the house, doesn't talk to the neighbors, doesn't go out for anything. So when he needs it, no one will notice he's missing. And Alice, all formal, says, "Mr. Chang-ho," and asks him to look out the window. She said they are almost there and admires the view, saying it's really nice there. Putting his card in his pocket. The protagonist says that from now on everything will be different, and also agrees that the view is really nice. They arrived at the Seoul Player Management Office. The office is a giant headquarters, much larger than the airport. Then Alice gives her old cell phone to the protagonist as a gift, and he gets very emotional. They say goodbye, and each goes to a different place in the headquarters, and she already schedules a dinner with him for later. The protagonist is amazed by the size of the place and sees that the players have become important figures in society. He goes to the good old line and gets number 18. Number 18? Could this be a reference to player number 18 from Dragon Ball Z? The card literally tells him to go to the waiting room, and he follows the little lights on the floor, and starts hearing two extras bragging about how they got good positions in the previous stages. And the extras talk about the 5 S-rank people, who are the leaders of the 5 largest guilds. And the protagonist thinks he doesn't want to stand out right from the start. The first S-rank is Kim Jae-yoon. Then comes... Wow, what a difficult name. The second is... You know what? I'm going to have this reader read it directly, because I can't pronounce these difficult names. Second, Cheon Jojo of the Red Rose. Third, Baek Kon Young of Nu. Fourth, Young Yunjo of Sonale. And the fifth, Chai Min Hel of One Yuri. The good thing is that you understood all the names. And the protagonist is already thinking about meeting them after he regains his power. And for that, he needs to recover his power as quickly as possible. And he wonders if there's a possibility for him to become even stronger than before? If he received the title of player. The door opens and number 18 is called, and our protagonist enters with firm steps. The receptionist indicates the location, and the test girl doesn't even introduce herself and already says, "You have to place your hand on this ball." Now there's something very important that you need to know. The darker the color that comes out of the ball, the stronger the person is. And the protagonist knows it's going to be a mess, because he's very strong. And when he places his hand on the ball, a blinding, very strong light starts to come out, and the protagonist starts to think it seems like it's going to be very strong. And the light even blinds the girl administering the test. But, no. It was all imagination. In the protagonist's head. "You are in F rank," said the girl. "You can take your hand off the ball and leave." F rank, and the protagonist stands there, static, frozen, with a dumbfounded look. But before that, the girl says she will guide him through the precautions. And the protagonist just keeps thinking, F rank is worse than D. And she explains that he will receive an E rank player card, because there aren't even F rank dungeons and he can only enter dungeons of his rank. F rank is like the squashed poop of a bandit's horse. The test administrator explains, if he wants to enter higher rank portals, he will need a guardian. And the protagonist is already imagining Balzard freaking out upon hearing this. Imagine Balzard saying that the Demon King doesn't need someone to protect him. Then the protagonist gets a bit depressed, as he recalls the trauma of 10,000 years in hell, where he had to keep climbing the ranks every day. There are 2 ways to rank up. The first is to take the basic education course and go straight to D rank. The second is by killing a monster and absorbing their magic power stone. Which one will the protagonist choose? B squared minus 4ac, pi equals 3.14. Ultra scanning all the monster spots. I remembered when I used to play for 3 days straight in one spot. I wouldn't even stop to eat, and my wife wouldn't get mad at me and would even put food in front of my keyboard. I really found an angel. Well, let's get back to our protagonist's story. The protagonist gets up to leave, and the girl explains that she will hand over his player card and asks if he wants to take the education course. And Chang-ho doesn't even wait for her to finish speaking and says he doesn't want to take the educational course. Thank you. And she thinks he's desperate because he's ranked F, which is the state that leads people to die in the portal. The protagonist leaves, and the girl is left pondering, when suddenly the ball starts to change color, and the girl is surprised because the ball starts to darken, and darken, until it becomes completely black. The girl thinks the ball is defective, and when she tried to pick it up, it broke, and she starts wondering if the person who just left is really an F rank. And she thinks, not even the strongest guy, Baek Kang-hyun, who is an S rank, managed to get anything more than a dark green. Remember when I said that the darker it is, the stronger the person is? The receptionist thinks, there's no way he reached black. And the protagonist has already gone straight to the E rank portal. And the rogue continues looking for a group. This looks like a fair. Looking for a healer. Looking for people above D rank. Looking for a tank. Just don't want a rogue. Explain to me, why does nobody like rogues? I, for example, have seen rogues with a passive ability to take the item from the creature before it hits the ground, and the item goes straight into the rogue's inventory without anyone knowing. And you, what's your opinion on this? The protagonist hands over the player card, and the guard lets him enter the portal. Entering through the portal, the protagonist comes out on the other side, startled, thinking he was going to enter a portal again and end up in hell. The protagonist starts to prepare to look for creatures, when suddenly he hears a voice shouting, "Hey, you!" Our protagonist looks up and there was a gigantic and intimidating guy behind him. And the guy starts asking, "Did you come alone to a hunting portal? Are you in your second awakening stage?" The mage calls the giant by the name of Mr. Taisu and says they are ready to go hunting. The group is shocked when they hear that our protagonist isn't even in the second stage. And Taisu says that he apparently hasn't even had basic education and that for any rank, it's better to hunt in a group than alone. And Taisu is concerned about the protagonist and asks if he wants to join their group of 3. The other 2 are already one surprised and the other angry, because the protagonist won't be able to help with anything and Taisu made the decision to invite him to the group on his own. And the big guy looks back with an angry face and says, "You milk animals." This guy must be in a really tough situation to come here alone, and you all are just thinking about yourselves. Taisu asserts that he is saving a life by inviting the protagonist to their group. Taisu makes a proposal to the two of them. He says he won't keep his magic stones that drop from the monsters if they accept the protagonist. They can keep Taisu's share. The protagonist realizes that the big guy is really nice and thanks him for his kindness, but prefers to stay alone. Then the big guy introduces himself formally and says he is Kang Taisu and asks for the protagonist's name. He says Kang Wu. The giant said that he looks old, but actually, he's young and only 24 years old. Thus, the protagonist thanks him for the offer for the third time and says he will hunt alone, mentioning that he didn't come there without thinking and that he has a plan. Then the big guy gives him another tip, saying that this is the goblin's area and if he sees a giant goblin called Hobgoblin, he should run away, because that's the boss of that portal, a C-rank monster. And the protagonist realizes that Taisu is a good person and thanks him for the fourth time. The protagonist thinks, if he were really a novice with an F rank, he would join this group. It would be great to go with them, but being alone is better for me. Let's go, Genos. He activated his stolen speed ability and took off at an extremely high speed. Just ahead, he found the goblin's trail, and also discovered the goblin village. The protagonist activated all the hacks and jumped into the middle of the goblins, immediately slicing the first goblin. And slices here, slices there. There's blood and guts flying everywhere. And the protagonist says this was way too easy. So let's start the carnage. The Tramontina in the protagonist's hand starts slicing everyone. There's a goblin sliced in half, a goblin that lost an arm, a goblin that lost its head. 1, 2, 50, and 10, 455,000, 27, 229 and a half. And only reliable Tramontina. Knife in the gut, gut on the knife. The protagonist of the hack activated the speed hack, along with the blade hack. Who said the protagonist likes difficult things? Let's slice. I think this spot will be cleared quickly. Let's raid. And the goblins go into a frenzy mode. They all come at once. The protagonist doesn't even think anymore. He hits whoever is hitting, hits whoever is watching, hits whoever is getting hit, and keeps slicing. Thinking it was over, he looked to the side and there were still a few goblins trembling, with his blade dripping blood and evil eyes. The protagonist just dives in and slices the rest. Tired from slicing goblins, he then looks at the mutilated bodies on the ground. Suddenly, a system message appears congratulating him for killing E-rank goblins. The protagonist notices that he has leveled up 4 times and his demonic energy has increased once. Now only 2 levels away from entering the second stage. And the protagonist confirms that there is no demonic energy inside the magic stones. However, he is sensing demonic energy within the dead bodies. So, let's have a little snack. Authority of predation. And devouring all the bodies. He begins to feel the demonic energy inside him increasing, and concludes that the demonic energy is in the bodies and that each body has a different amount of energy, thus raising his demonic energy by 2 more levels. Since he doesn't need the magic stones to level up, he will be able to sell them and make money. Everything is perfect. Now he just needs to gather the magic power stones and leave. He observes that the predation authority skill strips all the flesh from the bodies, leaving only the bones, as if they were chicken. The protagonist starts dreaming about chicken and taking Alice out for dinner. He activates speed and begins collecting the stones at high speed. Suddenly, He starts hearing a noise and a crash coming from the middle of the trees and spots the robin goblin that Taisu had mentioned. A giant goblin appears, drooling with vengeance. Will the protagonist run away as suggested? The robin goblin starts channeling mana into the machete. And the protagonist is impressed that a robin goblin can control mana. Of course, the protagonist is not going to run away and prepares for the fight. He quickly compares the demonic energy and the mana inside the robin goblin, realizing that his demonic energy is far superior to the mana inside the robin goblin. And the big guy doesn't even think twice and delivers a mountain-shattering blow to the protagonist. The protagonist easily dodges due to his speed, but realizes he can't be hit by that ability. Otherwise, it's game over for sure. The protagonist quickly draws both Tramontinas and starts dodging the giant's relentless attacks. It's a swing from here, a swing from there, dodge from here, dodge from there. Holding the giant sword of the goblin, he realizes that the goblin isn't just big. He's also very strong. The giant is already foaming with rage because he can't land a single hit on the protagonist. The protagonist tries to counterattack the giant, but can only scratch the armor due to his low stats. The giant swings his sword here and there, and the goblin even kicks sand into the protagonist's eyes to see if he can get anything. And after a while, the protagonist had an idea. You know how it is, right? Caught off guard, we throw a rock. He grabbed a goblin skull and threw it at the hobgoblin. The enemy was caught off guard in front of him, and he looked back. And the protagonist activated another rack, the authority of the demon Crossel's fury. And he directs this power not at the protagonist but at the boss. And the boss went into a rage state, with his strength increased many times over, and starts slicing with much more force and power. Did the protagonist go crazy? But the protagonist knows that the ability is more of a curse than a power, as it increases the target's strength but decreases its attack speed and makes the boss completely irrational and attacking erratically, leaving the boss with much more openings. You know what happens next. Openings here, slashes there. And there go the knee tendons. The boss falls to its knees on the ground, but hasn't given up fighting. And them. And you just see blood spurting up, and then it's the protagonist's knife going through the boss's skull. The boss is there, lying on the ground, and the protagonist looks frustrated. I don't know why he's frustrated. He turns on all the hacks and wants it to be a tough fight. And he receives another message from the system, saying he completed the monster's hideout alone and gets a 150% experience bonus, thus leveling up 3 times, and, as a bonus, advancing to the second stage. Second awakening skill. Insatiable hunger. Rank C. And since the protagonist is the protagonist, he gained a skill that enhances his predation ability, making it even more effective. And the protagonist is happy, because, being a player, he can become strong much faster than in hell. So let's let the skill eat. Predation. And he devours the entire body of the boss, noticing that the smoke is much thicker and absorbs much more demonic energy than before. And it increased his demonic energy by 3 more points, totaling 19 points. And the protagonist realizes that killing stronger monsters further increases his demonic energy. The protagonist does that old and familiar energy elevation to see how much energy he has and is surprised, because he thought the energy had doubled, but it had actually tripled. And he has a deja vu of the core of the 10,000 demons that was sealed by Gaia and realizes that each time he levels up, the sealing of the core becomes weaker. So, he just needs to level up to regain his original power. The protagonist sees a magic stone, of a much higher grade, which dropped from the boss, and already has the next goal, of reaching the 3rd stage of awakening. The name of the manhwa will be pinned in the comments. If you liked it and want part 4, just ask for part 4 in the comments. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to motivate me, because it takes a lot of work to make these videos. You asked for it, and here is part 4. We'll start with the protagonist and Alice having dinner. Then we'll see the protagonist using 2 other skills and leveling up non-stop. We'll also see the protagonist using malice against malice and revenge against revenge. And 5 more skills stolen from the authority skill. The name of the manhwa will be in the comments. So, let's continue the story. After an intense day of work, Kang-gu and Alice go to the restaurant to eat chicken. I immediately looked at that strange little glove on his hand and thought, he's not going to eat with that little glove. I was surprised to see the protagonist eating with a fork and with his hand at the same time. Given how strong he is, he might even drink, but I doubt he'll get drunk. He's eating a lot and savoring the food. Alice asks if he's enjoying the food, and he confirms that it's amazing. And the girl asks, better than my kimchi soup? He creates a little suspense and says he much prefers her kimchi soup. Alice says that the protagonist is very funny and that he can stay with her. Oops, that he can have her chicken. Mentally, she thanks for the food and then asks, do you have any friends or family? He said no, that he has no friends, no family, and no home. Alice asks, where are you going to spend the night? He said he doesn't know, but that it's all right for now. And she says, if it's that bad, you can sleep at my place. I mean, stay at my place for a while. The protagonist is surprised and asks if she's sure. She says yes, because in the short time she's been with him, she's already received a lot of help from him and wants to return the favor. He thanks her and says he owes her one. The protagonist says that from this moment on, he will be under Alice's care, and she says she will be under his care. Do you know what that means? It sounds a lot like marriage. One promising to take care of the other, and she is very happy to provide comfort for the protagonist. Shortly after, the protagonist remembers he has something to give her. He puts his hand in his pocket and takes out a wad of cash, 3 million won. And of course, I converted that to reis, and it's more than 11,000 reis. He told her to accept it as rent. She said she can't accept it, because she's already received a lot of help from him. He insists, because he knows she has already spent a lot, and is almost out of money. Taking his hand off the money, he told her to accept it then as payment for the ingredients of the meals he will eat. Yeah, the protagonist really knows how to make money. He earned 11,000 reis in one day of work, and by accepting the money, she was overjoyed, because most of her problems were solved thanks to the protagonist. She claims she will make a stew better than the one from the other day, and the protagonist is already thinking about eating kimchi stew every day and selling many more magic stones. Then, Kang-gu asks if Alice knows any D-rank portals. She said there is one, but she has never been there. But they say a reptilian has already come out of there, and the protagonist plans to go there the next day to kill higher-level monsters. Ironically, he thinks, is cooked lizard tasty? And Alice gives her brother's room to the protagonist. Didn't I say that Blondie seemed to be her brother? A miserable son who hits his mother, and the protagonist says he's going to sleep very well, thanks to Alice. Alice says goodnight, turns off the room lights, and leaves, and the protagonist stays there with his thoughts, trying to remember the last time he slept on something so soft. Almost asleep, the former lord of the underworld thinks it was a great choice to return. Early in the morning, the protagonist was already wanting to enter that rank D portal. And there was that fair again. Everyone wanting to recruit everyone, except for the rogue. Speaking of which, I don't see the rogue here. Do you guys see him? I know this is a rank D portal, but the rogue is already part of our history. I had to leave that one for you to read. The rich guy is recruiting a team to safely carry him until he achieves the third awakening. Found him. Look, there's our rogue. But, if you noticed, the rogue has already leveled up. He's already in the rank D portal. The protagonist proceeds, hands his card to the guard, and enters the rank D portal. And he wasn't even scared this time. There's the protagonist's secret. He always warms up before starting another day of hunting. And you, who go to the gym and skip part of the warm-up. Warming up is always good to avoid injuries. So the protagonist activates another silence authority rack, where he can walk, talk, without making any noise, then jumps into the trees. That's why Alice is an angel. She relays the entire portal call to him. Before the protagonist enters the portal, Alice had already informed him that the lizards are practically blind and navigate by sound. Then it became easy for the protagonist. He can move around freely without being detected. The protagonist, with determination in his eyes, spots 3 lizards, and remembers another tip Alice gave him, that the lizards are weak against fire. The protagonist activates the Infernal Authority skill. Pay close attention to the demon who owns the skill, Demon Andres. Immediately after, the protagonist throws a fireball at the monsters. Now you will hear my beautiful voice. It's because I don't usually narrate.
Fireball that kills everyone. Bam! Boom! Goodbye.
There are 3 lizards being incinerated by the infernal fire. Infernal fire is not ordinary fire. It can't be extinguished by common methods. It can only be put out with demonic energy or mana. Infernal fire is even more overpowered because it doesn't burn the body. It burns the vital essence.
Damn.
Leaving an entire body behind, which the protagonist can use, with his predation ability. The protagonist starts thinking about the name of the ability he just used and remembers that the blonde guy mentioned this Andres guild. Suddenly, the protagonist senses a presence behind him. Turning around, he spots 3 more lizard men. The lizards full of fury and the protagonist ready to play a little more. You know what happens next. Fireball. That kills everyone. Help! Boom! Goodbye. Later, you can comment on whether you like my voice or the reader saying, Fireball, more. The protagonist, still cautious, amplifies the power of the authority of silence, bringing silence to the entire surrounding area. And leveled up. However, the protagonist is not happy, because he's leveling up very slowly. The protagonist killed 6 lizards and already leveled up. I personally think it's a lot, to kill just 6 lizards and level up. Suddenly, some people appear behind the protagonist saying that his equipment is for beginners, not knowing that the protagonist uses the legendary Hell Rack. They ask the protagonist if he's interested in joining their guild. And the protagonist asks what the name of their guild is. With a mischievous smile, the leader of that group says they are from the Andres Guild. The protagonist responds like Saitama, saying he's not interested, no. And he turns his back and walks away. The guy gets irritated because he found our protagonist very arrogant. The attractive woman next to him says he can't just leave like that, or the guild master will punish them. So we'll have to use plan B, bring him by force. And everyone with a sadistic look wants to use the protagonist to relieve their stress. Wanting to teach the protagonist a lesson, the leader starts making a lot of noise with his armor. The protagonist was already far away, hunting more lizards and doing the basics, killing and consuming. The protagonist realizes he has killed all the lizards that were nearby. He knows he's going slowly and plans to take a risk by attracting many more monsters. After consuming the last monster, he is undecided whether to attract more lizards in greater numbers. But suddenly, he hears a familiar voice speaking to him. The guy spoke to the protagonist, saying he was curious to see how a newbie hunted, and came to take a look. The protagonist had already noticed that this group likes to bully the weaker ones. And since they said they were worried, the protagonist responds that they worried for no reason. And the protagonist says, as you can see, I am hunting very well. And the leader of the group exclaims, can you see? What do you mean, can you see? I don't see any corpses. The protagonist says he's taking a little break, and the guy asks the protagonist why he's acting like this with his senior. The protagonist says he got very annoyed with his seniors for being too nosy. And the guy loses his temper and calls the protagonist a piece of shit. Our protagonist is bold and gives him a stare, asking if he's looking to fight or something like that. The lancer behind gets irritated and prepares for combat. However, the group leader tells him to stop, because he already has another plan to teach this son of a b. The group leader thought the protagonist had a B rank attribute at most, to act so arrogantly like that, and says he will make sure the protagonist deeply regrets it. The protagonist, being a good provocateur, says he's looking forward to it. Drawing his sword, the leader of that group starts banging on his armor, making a lot of noise, and says he wants to see how long the protagonist will stay so relaxed. And all the group members look at the protagonist with sadistic and malicious intent. And the big guy asks if the protagonist knows that the lizard men are extremely sensitive to sound. The protagonist, with a Saitama-like look or dead fish eyes, lowers his head and lets out a slight sadistic smile. Meanwhile, the leader of that group continues to provoke the monsters and exclaims, "They're coming! Prepare the defensive spell!" And he shouts at the protagonist, asking, what is he going to do now? Because from the sound, there must be a dozen of them coming. Someone said it's too little just to teach an arrogant rookie a lesson. And they say, if the protagonist kneels and begs, they might help him before he becomes disabled. And they ask, is the protagonist so scared that he can't even speak? The protagonist starts laughing and says he was wondering what they were going to do. Then Kengu asks, but is that all you can do? And the leader of the group, whose name I still don't know, asked, what the hell are you doing with your hand? And Kengu, with a demonic look, smiles and says, if you're going to do something, it has to be at least like this. Authority of the deafening roar. And he uses more power from the demonic hack and makes a noise that sends a sound wave for dozens of kilometers. The group is in shock upon hearing such a loud noise, not believing he could agitate so many monsters like that. And the protagonist continues making a lot of noise with his feet. The guy from the other group gets tilted and calls him crazy, telling him to stop making so much noise. Malice is paid with malice. And Kengu stays there, watching them from inside the little protective shield. The face the protagonist is making here is indescribable. And the guy stays inside the shield saying he's a freaking lunatic. And everyone inside is so scared, they couldn't even pass a Wi-Fi signal. And you can only see lizard shadows everywhere. Red eyes in the darkness. The terror is approaching, but 100 lizard men were already there and many more were coming. The group said this is madness and that everyone is going to die. The mage saw that things are going to go bad, and said she has never seen so many lizard men in her life. Since their survival depends on the mage and her shield, the group leader tells her to focus and make an even bigger barrier. The group leader starts shouting from inside the barrier asking if the protagonist is crazy. The protagonist doesn't even respond and jumps up into the trees. Not understanding, the group leader looks up and the protagonist tells him that he thought he said the lizard men are sensitive to sound. Then, the protagonist replied to him, saying that he knows that very well. And you can only see the lizards approaching at high speed with great fury. Dozens of lizard men are surrounding, hitting the barrier with all their might. And how's the group's morale? And the frightened one kept shouting, are you trying to get everyone killed here? The protagonist asks, what are you talking about? I don't intend to die here. And Kengu says, the only ones who will die here are you. With the authority of active silence, Kengu can speak calmly without being heard. However, that's not the case with the group, because when they speak, they make noise and attract the monsters. He's standing there, right next to the lizard, and the lizard doesn't even sense his presence and jumps onto the shield. And only now did the group leader realize that Kengu has a sound controlling ability. And when he looked back, he saw his tank being torn apart and swallowed by the lizards. Then he looks to the other side and asks the mage to create another barrier. However, it's already too late. She had already been impaled by the creature's tail and was about to have her head swallowed by the monster. She looks back, crying and in agony, and the group leader stood there in shock, watching his friend being devoured by the creature. Horrified and very scared, he puts his hand over his mouth to avoid making any sound, and beside him appears another group member, the Lancer, who was also being devoured. The spear fell in front of him making noise, and as he removed his hand from his mouth, he made a small sound, drawing the attention of the lizards, and he began to ask the protagonist to save him, pleading for help. The protagonist just watches him being killed by the lizards, and with a smirk on his face, wishes him good luck. Then, the nearly deceased group leader shouts at the top of his lungs, "You son of a BBB!" And he died in agony. The protagonist then looks at the lizards having a snack, and says that malice is repaid with malice and murderous intent with an even greater murderous intent. Then the protagonist goes back to doing what he was doing before being interrupted. fireball that kills everyone, bam, boom, goodbye. And he easily eliminates all the lizards. Activating predation, he begins to devour all the bodies on the ground, gaining another level of demonic energy. Soon after, he receives a system notification saying that the predation skill cannot be used on targets protected by Gaia, and he starts to think that he's heard that name before, and remembers what happened to him in the Gaia core, and thus devours all the monster bodies, leaving only the humans. The protagonist, who already has a hack, wonders if predation can absorb the player's abilities. Soon after, reaching level 30 of demonic energy, Kang-gu is surprised by how much his demonic energy has already increased. But not just the quantity, also the quality of the energy. So, let's go raid. The protagonist can't wait for his third awakening, as he had already hunted many lizard men that day. So the protagonist went hunting until he leveled up to 20. 3 days later, he was eating kimchi soup straight from the pot and says that Alice's cooking is delicious as always. Alice asks if he's going to hunt in the portal today. The protagonist says he's going to pull an all-nighter. This protagonist is my kind of guy, staying up all night on the raid. Resting doesn't give XP, sleeping doesn't give XP. The only thing that increases is experience. Outside of a spot or a raid, it's work, because if you work, you take XP straight from the credit card. Alice finishes making the protagonist's tea and says that in a few days her class will end and she'll start hunting goblins to level up, as she's aiming to get good attributes, but the important thing is to achieve the second awakening soon. How's the protagonist doing? He's just like me, says goodnight to his buddies, and when they go to sleep, he spends the whole night leveling up. The protagonist says that Alice will succeed soon, and she beams with joy. Then Alice changes the subject and mentions that she heard rumors about the portals, that there are chaotic players, who kill lower-level players. And the protagonist says it must be baseless rumors. But he decides to be careful and wonders if he himself is the chaotic player. And in the midst of another hunt, he becomes thoughtful about what might be happening, as there were no witnesses in that area and the bodies had marks indicating they were killed by the lizard men. The protagonist thinks, if he is the chaotic player, he doesn't even need to be careful. And leveling up non-stop, the protagonist finally reaches level 20, achieving his third awakening, and immediately opens the status window to see what third ability he gained. He tests the Hellfire ability, and sees that the flames are even larger, as Gaia's seal on him has weakened even more. His face looks like mine, when I get a legendary item in a raid. Soon after, the little mouth of the evil ability brings him a magic stone, and he immediately tests the new ability, which completely absorbs the magic stone, thus gaining double the experience from a single monster. Now Kang-gu gains an A-rank attribute, Mana-Thirsty Demon, where after absorbing a magic stone, he converts magical power into demonic energy. Although the protagonist has to give up the money from selling the stones, he can level up even faster, because he knows that only the strong survive. What happens when you just leveled up? You keep leveling up. I remembered a cousin who took a month to reach level 16 in Ragnarok. And I, after playing straight for 24 hours, was already level 16. The longest I've ever managed to play a game straight was 3 days in a row, and I had to stop because I was getting a really strong headache. And the protagonist went crazy, jumping in the air, using another hack, and went to level up, Sky Authority. It creates little wings on the protagonist's butt, and he starts flying. Thinking about it, he still hasn't found the boss of that portal. The forest is very dense, and he still doesn't have much energy to use the Observation Authority skill. Suddenly, he hears a voice saying, "What are you doing?" The protagonist immediately recognizes that voice, which sounds like Taisu. Taisu was bleeding, and a guy was calling him a muscular and stupidly resilient pig. The protagonist quietly approaches from behind, observing and trying to figure out what's going on. Answer in 2 seconds. Who is that lying on the ground? 1, 2. Of course, it's our rogue. He managed to get a group. The protagonist also quickly recognizes that it's the same rogue who was looking for a group to level up. Taisu asks the two in front of him why they are attacking members of their own group. And the green-haired one says that his voice is annoying and too loud, and tells him to be careful not to attract the attention of the lizard men. It's the classic, take it quietly, Seeing the whole situation, Kan-gu figured out who the chaotic players are. And the red-haired one readies his weapon and charges at Taisu, delivering a blow so strong to the shield that Taisu is knocked back. But Taisu is a tank and won't give up so easily. The duo thinks Taisu is in the second stage, because he is very resilient. Taisu gathers his strength and says he won't lose, that it won't be so easy to defeat him, and uses a block skill. Have you ever played as a tank with a lot of block? Once I played a game called Granada Espada, where my tank, with all buffs activated, had an 87% chance to block. I was there, in Gina, on the 3rd floor of Hell, facing Guerrero. Oops, I got sidetracked again. Let's get back to our story. Red-haired guy wants to attack Taisu and kill him. However, the green-haired guy back there warns that they can't kill the group, only injure them. The protagonist, hearing the duo's conversation about not being able to kill them, is left confused about what's really happening. The protagonist ended up there, in that place, purely out of curiosity. So he's unsure whether to help the group or not. But then the red-haired guy starts emanating an energy that the protagonist knows very well. Kan-gu becomes curious and comes out of his hiding spot, because the red-haired guy is emanating demonic energy. The protagonist starts wondering who these guys are. The red-haired guy asks the protagonist, who is he? And Kan-gu says he was just passing by. The green-haired guy says that the protagonist is very unlucky, because he saw what they were doing and now they have to eliminate him. Taisu recognizes the protagonist and calls Kan-gu by name. However, the duo knows they can kill the protagonist, who won't cause any trouble for them. With a smirk on his face, the red-haired guy prepares to attack, and the protagonist thinks that it's the first time in a long time he's felt this kind of energy from a person. Taisu yells for the protagonist to get out of there, but it's too late, because the red-haired guy is already on top of the protagonist delivering his blow, and the protagonist just gives a light slap to the red-haired guy's face. The green-haired guy is in shock at the size of the slap. And there it is, a body lying on the ground. The red-haired guy is confused about what happened, and the green-haired guy didn't even see what happened. Again, the same thing happening, the enemy in front and the guy looking back. When the red-haired guy went to say that something was wrong, he already gets a, "Get out of the way, Satan."
And also, "Get out of the way, Satan."
And Taisu is left not understanding the protagonist's monstrous strength, and Kan-gu starts channeling a spell. The green-haired guy saw that things are going to go wrong and runs forward, trying to help his companion. And the protagonist, with a Saitama-like look, turns and uses the authority of destructive void on the green-haired guy. What kind of magic was that? Sent the green-haired guy so far that he hit a tree. If you notice, the green-haired guy changed to blue-haired. He took such a hard hit that even his hair color changed. The red-haired guy was already bleeding from the nose, with just 2 taps. The protagonist lifts him by the hair and says he wants to ask something. Where did he get that demonic energy from? The red-haired guy is surprised that the protagonist knows about the demonic energy and calls the protagonist a jerk. You already know what's going to happen, right? The protagonist starts smashing the red-haired guy's head on the ground, until he breaks the ground with the red-haired guy's face. And the protagonist says, "I'm the one who asks the questions, you just answer." And the protagonist asks again, "Where did you get that demonic energy?" And the red-haired guy says he can't talk. Little does he know that the protagonist has a truth hack. The protagonist uses the Terror Authority skill, the same one he used on the blonde guy. And the demon Oroba scares him so much that he immediately says it was the guild master. After that, the green-haired guy, who isn't dead yet, tells Theo to shut up. Theo is the name of the red-haired guy. The green-haired guy yells, asking if Theo has gone crazy. And the protagonist starts casting a spell, and launches it straight into the green-haired guy's chest. After taking one like that to the chest, even I wouldn't come back alive. The protagonist asks, "What did the guild master do and what's the name of the guild?" And Theo responds that the name of the guild is Andres. And he said that the guild master gave this power through rituals. And Kan-gu asks, "What kind of rituals?" And Theo tries to resist answering, but the pressure from Oroba's increases. And when he's about to answer, things start to get strange. his body starts to contort, his bones break, his internal organs explode, and he dies in a waterfall of ketchup. And the protagonist realizes that they had a device that would kill them if they tried to say anything. And so the protagonist saves his acquaintances and the rogue. The rogue wakes up startled, and Taisu introduces their savior to the rogue. Taisu thanks him, because if it weren't for Kengu, he wouldn't be alive right now. Taisu says he thought Kengu was a beginner player. Everyone, including the rogue, thanks Kengu for saving them. And Taisu, smiling, says, "That's why people need to have many friends." Taisu picks up his phone to report the incident to the Vahan squad, and inform them about the possibility of the Andra Guild members being the Chaos players. The protagonist asks, "Who is the Vahan squad?" Taisu responds that it's a squad of government players. The protagonist asks Taisu not to do that, and says he wants to deal with the Andres Guild personally. Taisu kneels and promises eternal loyalty to the protagonist. The protagonist looks and sees a similarity between Taisu's actions and Balsad's. For those who can subscribe, I really appreciate it, as I need your subscription and your like to motivate me, because it takes a lot of work to make these videos. If you liked it, give it a like, subscribe, and share it with at least 5 WhatsApp groups. I almost forgot, activate the bell to receive new videos. The name of the Manhwa will be in the comments, and for those who want part 5, just ask for part 5 in the comments. This is part 5, the name of the Manhwa will be in the comments. Whoever can, please support with a like and let's get into more story. Our friend Ladino thanked the protagonist very much. Just like Taisu, Ladino promises eternal loyalty, and, very moved, says that when he becomes stronger, he will help Kengu. The protagonist becomes curious about how Taisu managed to hold off the enemies and asks, "What's your level?" Taisu says he has advanced to the 2nd stage and has a special Class A ability. So the protagonist does the math and deduces that Taisu could become a great Class S tank. He imagines putting Alice in Taisu's group, as the group would be very strong, with a tank and a high-class healer. The protagonist heard a grunt coming from the trees. Can you guess what's happening? That's right. Green-haired guy woke up. He didn't die. He was just napping. And the protagonist grabs him by the neck to ask some friendly questions and tells him not to lie, because if he does, he'll regret it. The protagonist asks how he gained the demonic energy, and green-haired guy, lying, says he doesn't remember, and gets a light kick to the face. And the protagonist asks, "Now, do you remember?" Green-haired guy says he remembered and that he was ordered to take them alive to use them as sacrifices. Then the protagonist gets an idea, gives a very mischievous smile, and says with a sinister look, "If you don't want to die, you're going to have to help me with something." The scene changes. Green-haired guy is carrying a giant suitcase and then approaching white-haired guy. Kong Cheol Ho is the name of the green-haired guy, but I prefer to call him green-haired guy. White-haired guy asks green-haired guy, "Where is red-haired guy? Didn't you go hunting for sacrifices together in a B-rank portal?" And white-haired guy continues asking, "Why did he take so long and why does his face look like that?" And green-haired guy says that red-haired guy died. White-haired guy is shocked. "What do you mean he died? There's no way to die in a D-rank portal, since you guys are much stronger." Green-haired guy hands over the sacrifice and says that's what happened. And white-haired guy says there's no way he could have died, because there are only noogs in the 2nd awakening in that portal. Green-haired guy explains that there was a high-level player there in that portal. White-haired guy grabs the suitcase and then opens it to see the sacrifice inside. And the proto is pretending to be all injured, with blood, that, I don't know whose. I think it's from the green-haired guy, all over his head. White-haired guy says it's better this way, because he won't have to share the sacrifice with red-haired guy and green-haired guy can keep all the demonic energy for himself. Green-haired guy, shouting, says he doesn't want the sacrifice and that white-haired guy can keep it, then runs away. White-haired guy thought he was running because the death of red-haired guy had affected him a lot, not knowing that green-haired guy was running to save his own life. And so, the trap is set. White-haired guy brought the suitcase inside. Inside the demon cult sanctuary, everyone was already in place waiting for the sacrifice, and white-haired guy tells the cult leader that the plans were disrupted by a high-level player and that red-haired guy was killed. The group leader asks, "And what about the sacrifice?" And when the white-haired guy opens the suitcase, everyone shouts, "Oh, great immortal Andres!" And the protagonist is placed on the altar for the sacrifice. The protagonist is a good actor and remains still, motionless. The cult leader says, "Since the owner of the sacrifice isn't here, I'll take it. Let the ceremony begin." At the foot of the altar, there's a chest full of energy stones, and the leader asks the guy to pick a really big stone. The cult leader starts the ritual by breaking the energy stone, and there's a burst of power rays everywhere. The broken magic stone begins to melt and rises towards the ceiling, opening a spatial rift, and demonic energy starts pouring out of the rift. Their method of collecting demonic energy is like this. All the demonic energy comes out of the rift and enters the body of the sacrifice, causing it to explode. And whoever drank the blood of the sacrificial victim will retain the demonic energy. And the protagonist pretends to be suffering in great pain, and the cult leader is pleased, increasing the level of demonic energy within the protagonist so that he dies overflowing with demonic energy, raising the level to 3 times and then to 5 times. The protagonist is putting on an act. He screams even more. The cult leader gets excited and increases it to 10 times, 15 times, 17 times, 20 times, 30 times. And the protagonist starts using the predator ability on the energy. The cult leader doesn't stop, and increases it to 40, 50 times the level of demonic energy within the protagonist. Only later does he realize that something is wrong and wonders why the sacrifice doesn't stop absorbing the demonic energy. The cult leader shouted for the protagonist to stop absorbing the demonic energy, and Kang Lu devoured everything, down to the last particle. Right after, the protagonist sits down and says that his demonic energy increased by 20 points all at once. And the protagonist asks the cult leader if there's a way he can do that thing he just did again. Just one more time. The cult leader gets furious and tries to attack the protagonist. The protagonist, with a smile on his face, just dodges. The cult leader gets even more nervous and throws several fireballs at the protagonist. The protagonist tanks everything, activating another very overpowered ability, Authority of the Impenetrable Fortress. Seeing that he won't be able to win, he asks for help from his followers. The protagonist pulls out a Tramontina and slices the first, second, and third, and tells all the others to get out of there, because they are useless. The cult leader gets furious and summons the infernal flame Andres. The protagonist sees that, turns his face, and starts laughing with his back turned. Turning to the cult leader, the protagonist shows what the true infernal flame Andres is like. The typical, mine is bigger than yours scenario. The cult leader makes a weasel-like face and is paralyzed and astonished. The protagonist smiles, because he is far superior to anyone else there in that place. With his butt clenched, the cult leader immediately kneels and calls the protagonist Master. He tells all his followers to kneel before the manifestation of the great Andres. The protagonist smiles, because he knows the cult leader is just pretending, that the cult leader thought quickly and pretended to recognize Kang Wu as the great Andres. Kneeling, the cult leader asks for one more chance. The protagonist says he wants to speak with him alone and tells him to send his subordinates away. The protagonist asks what the cult leader's name is. Ju Diok Yun, he said. We will call him Diok, as it's much easier to say. Diok begins to speak, "Oh great Lord Andres." And the protagonist immediately tells him to stop the nonsense, as he knows that Diok knows the protagonist is not an. Now you know that I know you know. Now that you know that I know you know. Stop with this nonsense. Du asks Proda, "Who are you?" And Proda says he's the one who asks the questions here, with an intimidating look. He asks how he managed to do that and where he learned to use a magic stone to open a dimensional rift. And trembling, he said he received it when he was evangelized. Du tells him he was evangelized by a man wearing a demon mask. That this man promised him eternal life in exchange for following the Church of the Demon. The masked man told him, "Accept or die." So he accepted. Quite the argument, this masked man, don't you think? And Proda asks who this masked man was. It gave. He said he didn't hear, because the man didn't remove the mask and that he only communicates by letter, and hands a letter to Kangu. The protagonist, using Oroba, gives 3 instructions to do. First, to investigate the demonic cult. Second, not to perform any more rituals. And third, never to speak of what happened there. Kangu breaks the scepter with which to perform the ritual. Later, he returns home and Alice is very worried about him, because she called him 22 times and he didn't answer. Alice saw that everything was fine, and went to the kitchen to make kint. Alice also says that she acquired a very good rank B skill, Blessing of Light, and Kangu already imagines her teaming up with Tai Iso. Alice said she will become stronger to form a group with Kangu and finishes making a kint stew with ramen noodles. And Kangu, with a plate in hand, said he will protect this world so it doesn't turn into hell, so he can continue eating kint. The next day, at the player management office, Kangu is asking the attendant for his rank C player card. However, she said that this card is not issued immediately, because from rank C onwards, it's necessary to insert an identification device made with processed magic stone, and it takes time to be issued. Therefore, the rank C card will only be ready the next day, and so the prota leaves with nothing to do. What does an otaku do when there's nothing for him to do and he can't watch YouTube videos or read comics? Will he play video games? Of course. And Kangu enters an internet cafe looking like a newbie. He sits in the chair to play and immediately discovers that he can order food while playing. He thinks he's dreaming because he can eat without someone telling him to stop eating in front of the computer. Kangu chooses a game where an event is happening, and it seems to be the most popular game in the game. The group is made up of 5 people, where each one does their part, and he chooses to play as DPS. His party gets very angry, because instead of participating in the event, he's farming gold. Realizing that Kangu is a beginner noob, the insults start in the chat. Only sweet words, as you can read. Suddenly, the food that the protagonist ordered arrives, and he stands still in the game. Moments later, another warrior arrives and kills his companion, while he's standing still, in the middle of the event. Meanwhile, his party is begging him to please start moving again, promising to stop insulting him. And what did the protagonist do? He continued eating, standing still, and the beautiful and sweet insults continued. I left the insults for you to read. And how's the protagonist doing? Enjoying it. When Kangu looks at the game, he had been eliminated. Suddenly, he hears a loud shout saying, "Why is a noob like this in ranked?" The protagonist looks to see who was shouting, and there was a redhead, with blue eyes, very angry, asking what he was looking at. As she approaches Kangu, the redhead sees that he was her partner and notices that he was eating in the middle of the rank match. Right after, she tells him to get lost while she's still being nice, calling him a bastard. I remembered the woman who shot her boyfriend because he ruined a royal flush. I think she was right. Kangu, not understanding, asks what she's talking about, and she says, "What else would it be, you bastard?" and tries to grab our protagonist. But he's faster and dodges, even while sitting in the chair. She is startled by the dodge. Credit to the translators, because without them it would be difficult to bring this work to you. Continuing our story. And then, we see a very fast sequence of dodges. The redhead gets so angry that she uses her power to catch the protagonist. And the protagonist is so bold that even while sitting, he dodges again. Right after, he stands up to keep dodging. The redhead is left confused about what's happening because she is very high-ranking and there's a guy in front of her dodging with ease, and she looked shell-shocked when she only caught the wind and asks Kangu if he is from the Emer Guild. Remember that the redhead is missing an eye because the god of scribbles passed through here. The Emer Guild is one of the 5 largest guilds in the world. He said he's not in any guild, and she gets very angry, saying he's a liar. The redhead says she's in one of the 5 best guilds in the world. However, when she's about to say the name of the guild, the protagonist had already left her hanging and walked away, leaving her even more furious. Then she comes yelling at the protagonist, saying she's never heard of an A-rank player without a guild. The protagonist says he's not A-rank, but rather D-rank. She is surprised that he's a novice, and the protagonist tells her to be gentle, because he almost died when she attacked him. Shortly after, the protagonist left, leaving her very curious. The protagonist remembers that he is still weak and didn't expect to encounter someone of his level so soon. He almost couldn't dodge, and he only managed to because he hasn't lost his reflexes, just his skills. The redhead becomes curious and calls the HR of the Red Rose Guild to investigate the protagonist. Talking on the phone with Park Myung-woo, the head of HR at the Red Rose, the redhead asks for a favor since she is the leader of the Red Rose Guild. Cha Youngjinin is the name of the redhead. From now on, we'll call Cha Youngjinin the redhead to make it easier when speaking. The redhead is the leader of the Red Rose Guild, one of the 5 strongest people in Korea and consequently an S-rank player. She asks Park to investigate the protagonist because she thinks he might be from the demonic cult and mentions that he had a D-rank card, which is much easier to fake than a C-rank card, which uses a magic stone. She says she is suspicious of Kang Woo and mentioned that she doesn't know any demon worshipper with the ability to dodge her attacks, that there was definitely no one in the demonic cult with skills comparable to hers, and she thinks the protagonist could be a government agent or the cult leader. The redhead asserts that the protagonist is stronger than her. Back at the internet cafe, she sees that she has been demoted to the bronze ranking and is furious with rage, as it was all the protagonist's fault. I think she has every reason to be angry, because dropping a level, losing rank, or falling in league because of a noob can make you incredibly mad. At that moment, the protagonist thinks, I just got a sudden chill. The next day, Kang Woo is in front of the C-rank portal and reads the guide, which explains that there are trolls in that C-rank portal. The protagonist was prohibited from entering the C-rank portal because he was solo, as the troll boss had appeared, so only groups of 5 could enter. There were several people there excited to kill the troll boss, because he was worth 1,000,000 reis. However, most were scared, restless, and had a pessimistic outlook. Since Kang Woo isn't a nice guy, he decided to cause some trouble by using a bit of his demonic energy. He puts just a little bit of this energy into some people nearby. He uses a bit of the Wrath Power ability, and chaos ensues. The protagonist is causing trouble, spreading demonic energy to several people nearby, and everyone started getting angry. The anger burned so fiercely in their hearts that they couldn't hold back and charged at the police. The police didn't understand all that rage and let them pass through to the portal. The protagonist, taking advantage of the police's distraction, slipped through stealthily and entered the portal before everyone else. On the other side of the portal, he realized that the dungeon was a gigantic desert. Kang Woo stops and looks at his status window, and had a great idea, as he had already surpassed 50 points of demonic energy and started jumping towards a very high hill. Placing his hand on the ground, he prepares to use another hack. Demon Astaroth, Power of Observation. Kang Woo is able to observe for miles, surveying the entire surrounding terrain, until he finds the troll boss. At that moment, the other players appear full of rage, still under the influence of the authority of wrath, and the protagonist vanishes.
Vanished?
What a trip was that, dude?
And he leaves the small fry for those players who were just entering the portal, while Kang Woo goes straight to face the boss. Standing on a hill in front of the boss, Kang Woo begins to channel another ability and creates a spear with demonic energy. With blood in his eyes, he prepares to throw the spear with all his might, and lands one right in the boss's chest, and the boss falls dead, leaving the protagonist puzzled about what just happened. Of course, the protagonist forgot that he had increased his demonic energy by 20 levels in the previous chapter. The protagonist had 33 points of demonic energy and increased almost 100% of the power he already had. It was the first time he attacked a monster with his ability after absorbing energy from the dimensional rift. The protagonist is like me, never stops leveling up. The boss is on the ground, but there are some subordinates around. What to do? Kill them all, of course. He rolls up his sleeves, pulls out the Tramontina, and charges forward. He moves so quickly past the trolls that they didn't even see him go by. But this time, instead of tearing each of them apart, he lightly cut each troll, as he had already imbued demonic energy into the blade, which, upon contact with the trolls, caused them to explode. And it was a bloodbath. After killing several of them, Kangwoo leveled up 2 more times and gained another overpowered ability, Earth Blade, rank A ability. So, let's try out this new hack. And by letting a drop of demonic energy fall to the ground, the skill quickly spreads across the floor beneath the trolls. A troll is a troll, but it's not stupid. When they feel that energy passing under their feet, they know it's going to go bad, and each one runs for their life. However, it's already too late, and they were all sliced up. Remember that the Earth Blade ability is a combination of the Tramontina ability he already had with the Earth. It became much more effective. Now the Tramontina rises from the ground and impales whoever is on top. You know the drill, after killing, it's snack time. And the protagonist goes up 2 more energy levels, and thinks he's now leveling up in a more decent way. And the protagonist went to hunt more trolls before returning, disappeared, and set off to kill more trolls. Some time later, the other players arrived at the location where the boss was supposed to spawn, and everyone was upset because they didn't see any sign of the boss. After that, the other players return to the portal and the protagonist blends in with them. On the other side of the portal, everyone was very angry with the police, because the boss wasn't there. When suddenly, someone asks for silence and Soldier Var appears to conduct a surprise investigation. Suddenly, she appears, the commander of the 3rd unit of the Vara forces, Baek Haeoyen. Of course, I'm not going to call her by that name. She looks like an Amanda, Lays, Letitia, but I'm going to call her Bianca. For us, who are close, her name will be Bianca. Bianca is attentive to everything that is happening. What a beautiful waifu! And everyone starts to get worried and grab their IDs, and Kangwoo thinks about making a dimensional escape. But it's at this moment. Bianca appears in front of the protagonist asking for his ID. The protagonist starts to sweat nervously, thinking he might be mistaken for one of the Chaos players, and then he begins to chat with Bianca. The protagonist, looking like a love-struck fool, starts to notice how beautiful Bianca is. Kangwoo asks if she's conducting that investigation because of the Chaos players. Bianca looks surprised and finishes her inspection. Bianca gives the protagonist a suggestion, saying that since he just moved up to rank C, it's better for him to continue hunting in rank D portals. After being released, the protagonist calls Taisu and arranges to meet him later. A few days later, the protagonist, Alice, and Taisu meet at a cafe. Taisu introduces himself and asks if she is the healer that Kangwoo mentioned. Alice is even amazed by the size of the giant. After that, Taisu says that Alice and the protagonist make a lovely couple, which makes both of them feel awkward. Taisu calls Alice sister-in-law and asks if her ability is only healing. Alice is in shock over the fact that Taisu is calling her sister-in-law, and neither she nor the protagonist is denying it. Alice continues to be delighted by the fact that Taisu calls her sister-in-law, and the protagonist doesn't deny it. Alice says that her ability not only heals, but also provides buffs for agility, strength, and vitality. Taisu is amazed and says that now they just need a DPS. Taisu says he already has 2 names in mind for the group's DPS. After the meeting, the protagonist goes straight to level up, as he is very close to the next awakening. Soon after, he enters the troll dungeons and uses the all-seeing eye to find 8 groups of trolls. You know what happens next. It's Tramontinata here, and trolls falling there, with lots of XP coming in. Suddenly, the protagonist smells a very familiar scent. The smell of freshly spilled human blood. The protagonist quickly jumps to the location and sees that a C-rank group was killed instantly. Descending to the site, he sees that the group was killed with great brutality. He tries to identify who the bastard was that did it. When suddenly, he hears a noise, looks to the side, and is startled to see who committed the massacre. The protagonist exclaims, "What the hell is that?" It was a monster from the first hell. The Hellhound. Kangwoo wonders why the Hellhound is there. The Hellhound doesn't even blink and already jumps on the protagonist to kill him. The protagonist dodges and pulls out the Tramontina, which doesn't make a scratch on the monster. Immediately after, the Hound begins to channel a spell, a fireball, that kills everyone. Bang, boom, and the protagonist dodges. Is Kangwoo the king of the fireball? Did you think he would fall for that? The hound sprints to try to catch the stunned protagonist. But the protagonist is already in the air, very high. Kangoo jumps on all the stones that are in the air. Since his blade was useless, he's going to use another skill and summons that spear he used to kill the troll, spinning the spear with all his might. If he spins it a little more, he'll fly off like a helicopter. He channels it with great force and throws it. And this time it works. The spear hits the boss. Power of the Dark Spear is the name of this skill. The monster falls, writhing in pain. The protagonist breathes a sigh of relief, as it was the first time he was pressured, and it seemed over. But not really, and the protagonist looks shocked, as the hellhound was already coming towards him at high speed. So he dodges again, and dodging once more, he almost escapes from inside the monster's mouth. The protagonist has already tried 2 spells and neither of them worked. Still in the air, he prepares a 3rd spell. When he touches the ground, he uses the power of the earth, opening a large hole in the ground, and jumping over the monster with great speed, driving a spear into the dog's forehead. The spears didn't penetrate deeply into the dog, so it's not bothered by them. The protagonist quickly jumps off the dog and shows that he knows how to land with style, without taking his eyes off the target. The protagonist is surprised that the dog is still getting up, but he comes to the harsh reality that he is still weak and has a long way to go to regain the power that was sealed. The dog starts channeling hellfire and comes at the protagonist like a rocket. When he's smiling like that, you already know a new hack is coming. Demon Baphomet. Power of 1,000, and it increases the protagonist's strength by 1,000 times. Didn't I say he's using a hack? Who do you think will win? The Hellhound or the Lord of Hell full of hacks? Kangoo delivers a punch with the power of 1,000 to the creature's snout. Right after, the dog goes flying from the force of the blow and lands far away from the protagonist. The protagonist finds it disgusting to have to touch a creature like that. And for the first time, the protagonist thinks it would be great if he could use 2 hacks at the same time. Ready for another round of combat. The protagonist is happy, because he has often hunted these dogs in hell. The protagonist got lucky, because the dog only felt his blow now, and fell stiff. The protagonist is curious because the information window says he defeated a crack fragment and not a hellhound. The protagonist leveled up 5 times and reached the 4th awakening. And the 4th ability is also another hack he receives to hide the presence of demonic energy within him. The protagonist uses the authority of gluttony, which is the same as the authority of predation, and devours the little dog, and the protagonist made a terrifying face upon realizing that he can actually become even stronger than he was in hell. So let's go raid and level up like crazy, as if there were no tomorrow. After a tiring day of hunting, the protagonist decides to go home to eat a little. But there was someone waiting for him at the exit. And the redhead says, "Long time no see." And the protagonist says that they aren't that close, as they haven't even introduced themselves. She said they did introduce themselves, back at the internet cafe, and the protagonist remembers the conversation among the extras, where they said the redhead was one of the leaders of the 5 biggest guilds in Korea. And only now did the clueless protagonist realize why she was so strong. And the redhead starts talking about his entire life history. That he was born in 1995, is 28 years old, and was raised in an orphanage. The redhead also says that he registered as a player 3 weeks ago and has been rising monstrously since then. And she said he registered as rank F. He countered by saying that he didn't register as rank F. They were the ones who said he was rank F. The protagonist asks what she really wants, and the redhead said she wants to sponsor him as a player, and that he's probably stronger than she is. So it would be an investment. And the protagonist jokes with her, saying he thought she wanted his help to level up in that game at the land house. And she doesn't get even a little angry, and she tries to calm herself down, thinking to herself that she's a guild master, who can't get so upset for no reason. The protagonist stops joking and asks what he would gain from this sponsorship. The redhead said that he will get a free pass to enter rank A or lower portals, and if he needs help, she can recommend members of the Red Rose Guild to team up with him, and he can exchange magic stones directly at the guild without paying taxes. That she could lend him unique rank equipment or higher. However, he can take epic rank or lower equipment for free, and if he needs it, They can also provide a car and a house for the protagonist. The protagonist says that when the offer is too good, it raises suspicion and asks what he will have to do in return. The redhead said that he will have to do some tasks, but she can't say what the tasks are yet. The protagonist accepts the proposal because he has more to gain than to lose, and if the task is too difficult, he can just back out. He can't miss an opportunity like this. The protagonist asks when she will tell him what he needs to do, and the redhead tells him not to rush. Only when the time is right. The protagonist tells the redhead that he is much stronger than she imagines, and she smiles, thinking he's an arrogant bastard. Then she asks for the protagonist's phone number. The protagonist takes the opportunity to ask, when will he be able to see the equipment? The redhead replies that whenever he wants, and the protagonist says he wants to go now, because he urgently needs equipment. The redhead asks the protagonist to follow her, because they are going to her guild right now. The scene cuts to a bunch of extras asking what car that is, and everyone is fascinated by a supercar, saying it's very expensive, and the redhead is there, with her supercar, telling the protagonist to get in quickly. Inside the car, the protagonist asks how much that car cost. The redhead said she doesn't remember, because she bought it recently and doesn't even remember the price. She thinks it was 100 million won. Of course, I brought the conversion table for you. That's approximately 372,000 reis. The protagonist was looking at the car so much that the redhead said, if he wanted, she could give him one of those. The protagonist calls her Nuna, which means older sister in Korean. And of course, the redhead gets a little mad and says, if he repeats it, she'll shove his face into the car's airbag. Right after, they arrived at the guild headquarters, which is a luxurious, enormous red building that didn't even fit in the picture. The building is as big as a player support center. Upon arriving at the building, the head of HR and another extra are waiting for them. The head of HR introduces himself as Park Yeon-woo. The other extra is a bit stronger, as he is the chief commander Mun Yango, whom we will call Mun, and Mun was looking at the protagonist as if he wanted to kill him. The protagonist said that their offer was very good and that he would accept it even if it were covered in poison, and Park, smiling, said that they are not such an evil guild. The redhead, of course, doesn't understand the conversation. Park said he would take the protagonist to the equipment warehouse, but the redhead said it was fine, she would take the protagonist. Now I know the big guy he's full of jealousy. Mun said he will go with the two of them. The redhead asks, why does Mun want to go with them? And Mun said he wants to see what kind of human this guy is. The redhead says whatever, that he can go with them, and the protagonist already gives that mischievous smile you all know. Arriving at the warehouse, the redhead says she can't lend the protagonist just anything, that he can take equipment up to the epic rank without having to pay for it. The redhead emphasizes that for unique or superior equipment, he will have to make a cash deposit to take it out. The protagonist asks about the legendary and mythical equipment, and the redhead said that they are using that equipment. The protagonist says he will start by looking at the unique equipment, and Mun makes a very loud noise with his sword, drawing the attention of both. Mun is furious, because the protagonist is very close to the redhead he is in love with, and Mun tells the protagonist to call the redhead ma'am, instead of using her first name. And the protagonist has a Saitama-like look, that look of not caring at all. He looks right into Mun's face, and Mun tells the protagonist again that he has to call the redhead, the guild master. The protagonist laughs in his face, and says he doesn't want to. Mun's anger grows even more, and with his sword in hand, he tries to hit the protagonist. And how is the protagonist? Calm, very calm. The redhead calls Mun by name, and he stops his sword. The redhead orders Mun to look at her, and she is clearly boiling with anger. The redhead continues talking to Mun, but he doesn't respond and keeps the sword at Kengo's head. The redhead said that she is the one who decides how she wants to be called, and for him not to meddle where he's not wanted. The redhead tells the protagonist that he could have gotten hurt if he kept provoking Mun. And the protagonist says, okay, fine. Mun was distant, waiting for his sword. When the protagonist calls the redhead by her first name and also calls her Nuna. Kang-gu, with a mischievous look, says he doesn't need an imported car. He needs a unique piece of equipment. The redhead said she can't give that to him now. Only after an internal meeting. The protagonist senses danger and notices something approaching rapidly from behind. It was Moon, filled with rage because the protagonist called the redhead Nuna. The protagonist dodges the punch and looks at Moon's face, who is drawing his sword and coming with full fury to strike the protagonist. Moon is in shock at what happened. The redhead, with a psychopathic look, stops his strike with one hand. She asks Moon if he has already forgotten what she just said, and throws his sword aside. The redhead, with a lot of anger in her heart, orders Moon to get out of her way now. The redhead apologizes to the protagonist, and says that this shouldn't have happened, and also assures that it won't happen again. She asks what unique equipment the protagonist needs. The protagonist says he needs a chest plate. And Moon said to the protagonist, what does he think of the chest plate he's wearing? It's a unique item. If the protagonist beats him in a duel, he can keep the chest plate. The redhead becomes furious and goes after Moon, telling him to get out of there. The protagonist steps in front of her and asks her to calm down, saying that the duel is a good proposal, since he won't have to pay for the chest plate. The redhead says that Moon is level 67. The protagonist says to trust him, that it's all right, since Moon wants to give him something for free, he accepts. And then we have a flashback of when the redhead saved Moon, and that's why he swore eternal loyalty to the redhead and also his heart. The redhead says that Kingu might die, but he is waiting for his unique equipment. The scene cuts to the duel room, and the two are getting ready for the fight. The redhead whispers to Kingu that what he's doing is madness, and the protagonist is there, warming up, and warming up. I don't even need to say that this is the protagonist's secret. A lot of warming up with some hacks. Moon says he'll let the protagonist hit freely for the first 3 seconds. Only after that will he start to fight back. The protagonist is smiling, and asks if he got that part from a Marvel script. The protagonist tells the big guy to stop acting tough and just grab his sword. However, Moon says he has no intention of going all out against a rookie. And the protagonist says, since that's the case, and starts channeling energy into his feet, and the redhead already senses something different. And the protagonist activated the hack, Speed Authority, and charged at Moon, delivering a direct kick to Moon's chest. I think Moon felt a little bit of pain. Moon falls to the ground, and the redhead is astonished by what happened, while Moon is left confused, thinking to himself, if it weren't for the gargoyle armor, he would have died from that hit. And Moon draws his sword, and everyone is shocked, because the protagonist has only been a player for 3 weeks. The protagonist, with a devilish look, asks Moon, weren't you going to give me 3 seconds? Moon, in a lot of pain and drooling, asks the protagonist what trick he's using. The protagonist says it's not a trick at all, he's just stronger than Moon. The protagonist tells Moon that it wasn't foolish of him to give the first 3 seconds of advantage to someone he doesn't even know. The protagonist is laughing at Moon and says it was foolish of him to give an advantage in a duel. And also, Moon was boasting, thinking he was a rookie. The protagonist laughs even louder and says that Moon thinks it was a trick because it didn't happen the way he imagined the fight would go. The protagonist stops smiling, gets serious, and says, now that's enough, you pathetic loser. Moon grits his teeth in anger and looks to the side, seeing the redhead he likes watching the fight. Moon grabs the sword with great anger and prepares to attack. He raises the sword and starts to speak. By the power of Grayskull. Oops, he didn't say that. No. That's another story. Moon says, Celestial Killer Sword, and creates a gigantic sword of energy. Moon looks at the protagonist and is confused as to why the protagonist is laughing at him. The protagonist starts mocking Moon because the name of his skill is very cliché. The protagonist says that if it were him, he would be embarrassed to say the name out loud. Moon gets even angrier and prepares to attack, leaping at the protagonist. The protagonist focuses because he knows Moon is not weak and prepares another hack, Authority of Darkness. And he starts spreading a black shadow on the ground towards Moon. The redhead girl yells at Moon, thinking he was going to kill Kanwoo. With the sword nearing his head, the protagonist has only one thing to say, how stupid Moon is. He begins to enter the shadow on the ground. The protagonist disappears and then reappears behind Moon, so quickly that not even a millisecond has passed. Only the redhead girl saw what happened. Moon is left wondering where the protagonist went, when suddenly, the protagonist taps him on the shoulder and says, "You lost, idiot!" The protagonist uses another hack, Wave Authority, and emits a shockwave, throwing Moon against the wall with great force. It even looked like a Kamehameha. Did he die? No, he didn't die. No! He's moving his hand. The protagonist approaches the redhead girl and says, "Didn't I tell you I was stronger than you imagined?" The redhead girl said that Moon will be expelled from the guild and apologizes to the protagonist for what happened. The protagonist, all smiles, says he's fine because he got what he wanted. The protagonist smiles because the armor is better than he imagined. Kangwoo gets serious and looks at the guild master and says, "If this happens again, I will reconsider our relationship." Kangwoo says that this item is too big for him. If there's a way to adjust it, the redhead girl says there is, and tells him to put it on the table. Shortly after, the protagonist says he has to leave to take care of some things. Then the protagonist says goodbye to the redhead girl and leaves. He also says that he will pick up the breastplate after it has been adjusted to his size. The redhead girl, who is pondering whether the protagonist is human or not, because he defeated Moon as if he were a weak E-rank monster. The redhead girl thinks, if the protagonist continues to grow, he could become a world ranker. World rankers are the strongest players in the world. There is no Korean player who is a world ranker. The strongest player in Korea, Baek Kan-hyun, had potential, but even he couldn't become a world ranker. If you've made it this far, and haven't liked the video, Clytinho, the troublemaker, will get you. And if you've made it this far, and haven't subscribed, Jubilee the Regatta will crush you. I promise to bring only high-quality works for you. If anyone wants part 6, just write in the comments, and I'll bring part 6. You asked for part 6, so here is part 6. We see the protagonist looking at his status window, and noticing that his demonic energy isn't rising as quickly as before. The protagonist knows this happens because his demonic energy is very high. From now on, the protagonist will have to work much harder to increase each level of demonic energy. If you look closely, the amount of demonic energy the protagonist has is as if he were at the 6th awakening. The protagonist is calm because he has achieved one of his goals, which is to become strong and not die easily. The protagonist decides to meet with Alice and Taisu. The next day, at the D-rank portal, they meet. The protagonist tells Taisu to speak more quietly. The protagonist is surprised to see the two people Taisu had recruited for the group. The protagonist thought Kim was very handsome. Taisu introduces the boy as Kim, and the child is Chloe, and the protagonist continues to think that Kim is very handsome. Chloe immediately gets annoyed with Taisu, and says that she is not a child and throws a tantrum. Chloe tells Taisu that he looks about 40 years old. 40 years old? Exclaims Taisu, devastated by Chloe's words. The protagonist asks what their rankings are and their characteristics. Chloe, enchanted by Alice's beauty, asks to take a picture with her. Meanwhile, Taisu is brooding over what Chloe said to him, that he looks like he's 40 years old. Chloe says she's going to make her friends jealous, and will post it on social groups and also in the community tab here on the channel. The protagonist thinks that Chloe resembles Taisu, that she is a Taisu 2.0. Suddenly, Kimmy talks to the protagonist and says it's a pleasure to meet him and introduces himself as Kim Cheyenne. So we will call him Kimmy, because if I call him Cheyenne, I'll be reminded of that Busta one. Kimmy tells the protagonist that not long ago, he awakened an A-rank trait and says that he is of the warrior type, and mentions that Chloe is of the mage type, with a B-rank trait. The protagonist thought that Kimmy speaks formally, is very polite, and also very perceptive. The protagonist knows that Kimmy is an exceptional talent, because he awakened an A-rank ability. During his second awakening, Taisa asked the protagonist what he thought of the duo he met. The protagonist said they seemed trustworthy. The protagonist analyzes the group and thinks it's very good because it has a short-range damage dealer and a long-range one. And it also has a very strong tank and an exceptional healer. The protagonist says that this is the ideal 4-person group and mentions that the composition is not the only good thing, but also that in this group there are 2 players who acquired A-rank skills during their second awakening and 2 others who acquired B-rank skills during their second awakening. The protagonist tells the group that he will accompany them on today's hunt. The protagonist says he wants to see what they are doing wrong in order to fix the group. So, off to the portal. The scene shifts to D-rank trolls, drooling and charging at the group with all their rage. I just don't understand why there's a masked troll. After that, we see Taisa crushing the trolls with his large shield. I've used many skills that not only knock down, but also stun. The trolls can't get up, and immediately the mage uses lightning thunder, which is a very powerful skill, thus annihilating the fallen trolls. The mage had just cast her skill, and hearing a noise, she looks back and sees a horde of trolls quickly approaching, and at the same moment, she shouts for Taisu to help her. "Let's run!" Taisu quickly goes to the mage's aid, and turns on the spotlight of his shield, blinding the driver coming towards him. Oops, blinding the trolls. Alice prepares the light energy skill and strengthens all the tank's attributes, giving him Deca, Durateston, and Trembolone. Then Alice does what I thought was unthinkable. She uses her staff as a bow. I've never seen a staff turn into a bow like that. I've seen a staff transform into a bow, and then the person use the bow. Alice shoots arrows at all the trolls. Taisu, being very pumped and full of hormones in his body, can't stand still and sprints towards the trolls. Taisa looks like he took 15 scoops of pre-workout. Moments later, Kimmy comes in slicing through all the trolls with ease. Taisa says that Broda is very good, but Kimmy is not far behind. Taisa asks if Kimmy learned fencing before becoming a player, and Kimmy says yes. Taisu asks the protagonist if he thinks that group is amazing. Kengu is still analyzing each member's movements, and says he will mention some things they need to change. And he answers Taisu's question, saying that the group is not amazing. And everyone who is already feeling confident is perplexed by the protagonist's opinion. The first to be evaluated is Taisu. The protagonist points out that Taisu is a good tank, but he is focused on attacking with his enormous physical strength, unnecessarily wasting stamina. The protagonist says that Taisu is a tank, so he only needs to block and draw the monster's attention, and that is more than enough for a tank. Now it's Alice's turn. Alice is startled and starts trembling and sweating in anticipation of what the protagonist will say. The protagonist says that a very good thing she did was to reinforce Taisu, because a healer must always think about keeping the tank's health high. As for the negative part, the protagonist didn't like it when Alice stopped healing to attack the enemies, becoming a target for even more enemies, because the healer is already a natural target for enemies, making the tank's job even more difficult. Alice apologizes, as she didn't know she was aggravating the monsters. Have any of you ever played as a healer? I played Warhammer Online once, where I created a character specialized in healing and buffs, and one of the healing spells only activated when your friend was at 10% health. It was a lot of shouting, something like Ilmanda, Ilmanda. Ananda was the name of my character. My squad knew they couldn't curse at me, otherwise they'd be left without healing. The protagonist says that's Alice's only problem, and turns to talk to Chloe, who, being very energetic, introduces herself immediately. The protagonist says Chloe made a mistake when she used a powerful spell to kill enemies that were already down, when she should have used that spell on the 5 trolls that appeared behind her. Chloe needs to pay more attention on the battlefield. The protagonist gives Chloe a tip, telling her to reduce her electric attack power, as a small amount of lightning is enough to paralyze the monsters, and leave them for Kimmy to kill, since Kimmy is the group's main damage dealer and she is the secondary damage dealer. Chloe isn't upset with the protagonist and says she understood the tips. Now it's Kimmy's turn. The protagonist says that he was perfect. The protagonist thinks to himself that Kimmy was incredible. It's as if he has 10,000 years of experience. And everyone looks at Kimmy in admiration. Kandu calls the group to venture deeper into the forest to put into practice what he just taught. And then it's a complete massacre of the trolls, with each one doing their part. The protagonist says that they managed to understand and are doing very well. Out of nowhere, a monster appears that catches the protagonist's attention, and he immediately thinks that it's not a troll. And a demonic wolf is approaching with devilish eyes, drooling hatred and smelling of death. And how's the situation? The wolf instantly jumps on the tank, and the protagonist draws his Tramontina to help them, but is surprised by Kimmy, who advances and cuts the monster. Kimmy tells everyone to run, does a roll, lands on his feet, and is ready for another attack. This Kimmy is fierce, and quickly channels mana into his sword for an even stronger attack. Kimmy slashes the belly of the demonic wolf. What happens when you turn your back on the enemy? And also the satanic Mies. You get a Deca critical attack, of course. The boss is so fast that before Kimmy hits the ground, it already launches an attack to kill him. Authority of divine power. The protagonist activates another hack and delivers a serious punch to the boss, driving the wolf's head into the ground. The boss was like a pig being slaughtered, trembling and agonizing. And once again, the protagonist receives in his status window that he killed a fragment of the rift, and the name of the demonic wolf does not appear. The protagonist helps Kimmy to stand up and asks if he can stay on his feet, and Kimmy says he can. The others, who didn't help at all, arrive shortly after asking if they are okay. Kimmy said he could stand, but soon fell with wobbly legs. Taisa says he expected the protagonist to kill the boss, but was surprised it was with just one punch. Everyone keeps praising Kimmy, saying he's amazing. And the protagonist becomes even more curious about who Kim is. The protagonist thinks that Kim is abnormally powerful. Taisu helps Kim walk, but the giant is so tall that he lifts Kim off the ground. The protagonist quickly offers to help Kim, but with other intentions, as he knows that Kim is excessively strong and that this cannot be considered a natural talent. Hiding his demonic aura, the protagonist uses the authority of observation to see Kim's status. Look at the protagonist's face just taking a peek, but upon reading Kim's status, the protagonist is surprised. Kim gained an SSS rank ability at his first awakening, descendant of the martial god, and the title of the chosen one. Kim is the hero born with the destiny of being the world's guardian, and the protagonist keeps wondering, who is this guy? But the protagonist knows who he is. Kim is destined to be the protagonist of this world. Credit to the translators. The soul of the martial god, Cheon Taewon, resides within Kim, and the protagonist becomes worried because he is a demon king, and Kim is the only person in this world who can defeat him when he regains all his power. The protagonist has an idea of how to resolve this, as he also cannot let the opportunity of having someone as rare as Kim slip away. First, the protagonist thinks about doing like the redhead, who tried to buy the protagonist's friendship and commitment with money. However, the protagonist knows that this might not work, because Kim might not be swayed by money, which could result in the protagonist having a very powerful enemy against him. The protagonist also cannot place his faith in friendship, as he knows that friendships can be broken. In this case, the protagonist already knows what to do and gives an evil smile. Taisa asks why Kim didn't join a big guild, and mentions that the mere guild is recruiting, and Kim shudders upon hearing this. Everyone notices that Kim didn't like it when the mere guild was mentioned, and Kim says he doesn't want to talk about it. Moments later, everyone leaves the portal. Already outside, the protagonist tells Alice that he won't be going home with her because something urgent has come up and he needs to take care of it. Kandu says that they just called and he needs to go. The protagonist says goodbye to Alice and tells her she can have dinner first. When Alice leaves, the protagonist smiles maliciously. The scene shifts to Kim looking at his phone and waiting for the bus, when suddenly, the protagonist appears wanting to tell him something very important. The protagonist says it's something private and they need to go to a more secluded place, leading Kim to a dark alley. Kim smiles at the protagonist when suddenly, the protagonist punches the warrior in the stomach and, grabbing him by the shirt, throws him to the ground with all his strength. Kim was on the ground trying to understand what was happening. However, the protagonist puts his knee on the warrior's chest, who screams in pain. The protagonist tells Kim that this is just a precaution. The protagonist, with the strangest face in the world, says he wants to be a true companion to Kim. Kim says that this is looking bad. The protagonist channels his demonic energy into his hand and plunges it into Kim's chest, using the hack authority of subordination. Kandu tries to make Kim his subordinate. Kim tells the protagonist to stop, and the protagonist tells him to relax. Dominating Kim's heart, the protagonist gives him an order to forget what happened there, and tells him to live a peaceful life and level up with the other group members. The protagonist says that given the group's attributes, they will certainly be the strongest group of all. The protagonist also mentions that after Kim becomes his familiar, he will be able to use part of the protagonist's power. When the protagonist withdraws his hand from Kim, the mark of subordination appears. Kim wakes up startled, not knowing what happened, and says he swore he was at the bus stop, not knowing how he ended up there. Looking at his phone, Kim discovers that an hour has passed since the bus stop. Still feeling something strange, Kim thinks it was the fight with the monster that made him faint. Kim almost cries, thinking he is very weak, and says he needs to get stronger to cut off the head of the vice leader of the Mir Guild, who, judging by the last name, seems to be Kim's brother. Moments later, the protagonist says, "It worked!" And we see Kim, still staggering, coming out of a dark alley. The protagonist is observing his status window where it says that Kim Chi-hoon will be registered as a familiar. Yeah, I guess the warrior turned into a pet. The protagonist thinks that Kim can evolve enough to reach Boson's level. When the bus left, Deok calls the protagonist and says he has good information, because today he found traces of demonic energy. Deok told the protagonist that this demonic energy doesn't seem to have been left on purpose. So, it shouldn't be from a human, but rather, from a demonic beast. The protagonist asks, "Where did you find this energy?" Deok replied that it was in a B-rank portal. Did you understand the name of the place? Me neither. The protagonist licks his lips, thinking he's going to kill and devour another strong monster from hell, which might be a beast from the second level of hell, and hopes to greatly increase his level with this. The protagonist takes a train that will take him to the place where the portal is located. On the train, the protagonist feels uncomfortable because it's very crowded and he had to stand. The protagonist says he will ask the redhead for a car once he's done with this monster. As he gets off the train, the protagonist hears two extras talking about the ban entering the portal because a mutant monster appeared inside. At the portal, all the hunters were annoyed because they were prevented by the guards from entering the portal. Suddenly, a voice over the loudspeaker tells everyone that the portal is restricted because a mutant monster has already killed 10 hunters, and they still haven't identified anything about the monster. The protagonist believes it's a hellish mutant monster and gets very excited. The reporters were asking so many questions that a soldier ended up saying the mutant looked like a lion, and the protagonist immediately thought the mutant must be a boar, becoming even more interested. The boar is one of the strongest predator monsters of the second hell. This beast has 5 legs and resembles a lion. Its favorite snack is the first hellish boss that the protagonist faced. This boss has a peculiar characteristic. After eating 5 victims, it becomes satiated and goes to sleep, becoming passive unless attacked. When the protagonist was weak, he often hid from this boss. The protagonist starts laughing because he knows this time it will be easy. He plans to give 5 people to the mutant to eat, and after the monster is asleep, the protagonist will kill it. Kandu calls the redhead and informs her that he was blocked at a B-rank portal and asks for her help to get in. The redhead, who is warming up to start lifting weights, says she will help him, but she will need his help with something worse than what's in that portal. The redhead asks the protagonist to hand his phone to the soldier because she will authorize his entry. Moments later, the soldier hands the phone back to the protagonist and says he is authorized to enter, leaving everyone curious about who the protagonist is. 6 extras from the Mirror Guild said that if the Red Rose's protagonist can enter the portal, they can too. The spear-wielding extra asks the protagonist where his group is, and the protagonist, after analyzing the spear wielder's equipment, smiles and says he came alone. Then, all the members of that Mirror Guild group start criticizing the protagonist, saying that a few days ago they were hunting in a C-rank portal, and that this portal here is not as easy as the C-rank portal. And to make matters worse, the blue-haired guy said that people like the protagonist are the ones most likely to die. Well, knowing the protagonist as we do, we can say he's a dead man walking. Blue-haired guy asks why the protagonist isn't saying anything, and if by any chance the protagonist has turned into a chicken. Blue-haired guy, teasing the protagonist, says he doesn't need to go in there alone, like a rabbit ready to die, and invites the protagonist to join his group. The protagonist says that the blue-haired guy is being very nice to him, and he agrees to go with his group through the portal, since the protagonist was afraid to enter the portal alone. The protagonist, in his thoughts, starts counting, and I left it for you to read, and each member of the Mirror group has negative thoughts about the protagonist, and he's just counting how many victims for the boar. The protagonist knows that 5 victims are needed for the boar to be satisfied. Including the blue-haired guy, there are 6 victims. 1 extra victim, just in case. The protagonist smiles diabolically. In chapter 38, we see the blue-haired guy plotting with the vice leader of the Mirror Guild to humiliate the protagonist in public. The blue-haired guy didn't expect the protagonist to play dumb and join their group. And so, 2 rival guilds come together to kill a boss. The blue-haired guy and the other members of the Mirror Guild, reluctantly, head to the portal with the protagonist. The blue-haired guy is planning to do something nasty against the protagonist, and the protagonist is also planning horrendous things against everyone in the Mirror Guild group. Malice is repaid with malice, and murderous intent with an even greater murderous intent. Credits to the creators of the work. Switching the scene to inside the portal, the protagonist, still pretending to be clueless, asks the members of the Mirror Guild if they are going to kill the monster together. This portal is different from the others because it resembles a maze and has narrow alleys. The blue-haired guy asks if the protagonist is stupid and says there is no group, that the protagonist is alone. The extras continue to humiliate the protagonist, as does the Red Rose Guild. Let me summarize the Mirror Guild. The leader is the patriarch of the Kim family. He owns an electronics conglomerate, and 5 years ago, when the portals opened, Kim Jae-hyun and his eldest son awakened together. The leader of the Mirror Guild is a world-ranked player. It's time to start the mischief. The roadmap has begun. Using the observation hacker, the protagonist tries to locate the boss. The protagonist discovers that the boss is on their side, behind the wall. The boar was wide awake and very hungry. The protagonist already knows what to do to attract the boss, and plans to spill a lot of blood. The protagonist uses a new hack, Authority of Temptation. This ability attracts the monsters with what they like the most, and everyone starts to smell something very good coming from inside the dungeon. The boss goes crazy with that smell and heads towards them at high speed. All the extras, sensing the boss's presence, prepare to fight. Spot the differences. Where is the protagonist? Blue hair tells the protagonist to stay put, because that mutant is theirs alone. The boss is coming at high speed, but the protagonist manages to find a moment to tease blue hair. I've seen insults before. Sometimes you insult the guy's mom, the guy's dad, the guy's grandma, the guy's great-grandma. But I've never seen an insult like this. The protagonist calls the guy a bastard, driver of Ice Sky trucks. Blue hair couldn't believe what the protagonist had said and tells the protagonist to repeat it. The protagonist says that bastards like blue hair are the first to die of fear. That scene was so good that I would say this in the protagonist's place. You're the damn driver of the Ice Sky truck. You already know. Boss in front, and the leader turned away, distracted. Everything is set to go wrong. And Blue Hair didn't even have time to see what had happened. An extra had already turned into a skewer. The extra who turned into a skewer is still alive, writhing in pain. So, count with me how many are going to die. One's already gone, and the boss is getting ready to have his snack. The protagonist is also going to help count. Blue Hair recovers from the shock and organizes the group to try to get the extra out of the creature's mouth. Blue Hood shoots an arrow at the boss's head, but the boss is so fast, it seems to have teleported. The boar jumps on all the columns with its prey in its mouth at high speed. The boss was like a dog when you try to take food out of its mouth, growling, staring at you, and chewing. Meanwhile, Blue Hair is bravely telling his group to hold their position. 2. Another extra is gone. The creature's speed is sinister. In the most impolite manner in the world, the boss hasn't even finished eating, and already has another one in its claws. And how is Blue Hair? Just trying to keep up with the boss, uselessly. The boss starts chewing the second extra. Let's see if this time it has manners. And the protagonist is there counting. Blue Hair prepares to attack the boss with his tuned spear, and gives the boss a mega shock, preparing a combined attack with the other 2 group extras. 2 more are gone at the same time. Now, that's more like it. Blue Hair is starting to feel the terror of facing a hungry boar. The boar's lack of manners when eating is sinister. 2 at the same time. I bet Mama Boar taught him, and he didn't learn. Oh right, I even forgot about Little Blue Hat. Look at him sitting there, scared out of his wits. He must be pretending to be a plant. Little Blue Hat got one of those types of fear. The paralyzing fear. And the protagonist continues counting. 3, 4. Blue Hair prepares his final blow and gathers all his strength. However, the boss is finishing his skewers and already eyeing his next snack. This boss is just like me when I was in elementary school, grabbing a plate of food at school and then eating at the end of the line to go back for seconds and thirds. Blue Hair is flying towards the boss with his final attack, and delivers the attack, instant thunder on the boss. The boss spins and kicks Blue Hair, throwing him against the wall with great force. Blue Hair, who still hasn't died, broke 72 ribs, 3 cervical vertebrae, and 18 legs. When Blue Hair is reborn in the Ice Sky, he will either die again from the damage he took from the boss, or be born completely broken. Blue Hair decided to open his eyes, but the terror is right in front of him. Blue eyes, mouth salivating, and another skewer to the count. Wow. Luckily the protagonist remembered, because I had already forgotten the count. Everyone died. The Marauder's map is finished. Poorly done. If you didn't die, leave a like, subscribe, and share, and also send it on WhatsApp to your grandma. Remember that the video isn't over. There's one more chapter. The boss is there, eating the last extra, and Red Hair is knocked out in front of him. The boss continues to be rude, letting food scraps fall from his mouth. Since you can't waste food, the boss picks up the food from the floor and eats it, quickly reaching a satiated state. After downing 5 plates of food, the boss goes to sleep, with a full belly. Blue Hair is standing in a very strange position. Lucky for him, the boss doesn't want anything to do with him. The protagonist, walking on top of the boss who is sleeping, explains to Blue Hair that the boss always sleeps after filling his belly. The protagonist activates 2 hacks, the power of the Black Spear and the power of Infernal Fire, merging the 2 and creating a new hack. The protagonist needs more power to kill the boar with a single strike. The protagonist is creating a new hack, writing some scripts to glitch the matrix and create a trident more powerful than the previous 2 hackers. Why have multiple powers when you can have one power that transforms into dozens of others? This authority hacker is really overpowered. The protagonist creates an S-rank ability. This new hack is transformed into an ability. The protagonist sinks the trident into the boss's skull, killing it instantly. Meanwhile, blue-haired guy is mooning. Since you all want to see what happens,